I call this meeting of the Northeast Independent School District to order. Let the record show that a quorum of board members is present, that this meeting has been duly called, and that notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meetings Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551. Item 2, Board Workshop. A, consideration, discussion, and possible action on revisions to board goals. And we have Dr. Gibson with us again.
That's right.
Thank you for being back. Dr. Micah, would you like to say
Yes. So I'm going to go ahead and begin. So Dr. Gibson,
Oh,
you're
wait,
welcome
the time is 5:32.
Oop.
Sorry.
That's okay. Dr. Gibson, you're welcome to come on up to the podium. So I want to begin this evening. So you guys all have a packet in front of you, and it starts with this very bright blue. So this is actually, and it's stapled together. This is not Dr. Gibson stuff. This is actually mine. But this is something, so I want you to remember when Dr. Gibson was last here, he had talked about that this was something I had been considering for a while. Ms. Groney, you and I have talked about it a bit. And so over the years, this has really been in the process to do. And of course, when COVID hit, it sort of derailed a lot of this work, right? So it's time to come back. So what I want to show you is sort of the journey that we're going to go on, all right, as a board, as a school district, in developing this scorecard. And so if you'll notice on this very first page, you'll see the mission that you all have over here as a board and as a district. And then you'll see that these things called District Scorecard 1 and 2, that's really where we're at tonight, all right? This is where we begin. Because if you'll remember, those are those pieces that you all work on. I purposefully do not name them. I just call them 1 and 2, because as Dr. Gibson will explain to you all as he goes through, you as a board can call them pretty much what you want. He has some recommendations, but different districts do different things, and they call them different pieces. From that, once you all develop 1 and 2, it's my belief we need to go to our community and to our staff and really get their input, all right? And have a really good listening session to explain, here are those 4, I'm just going to call them buckets. I think that's what you're going to call them, right,
Yeah,
Dr. Gibson?
Perspectives is probably the proper term, but I don't want you to think that I'm recommending perspectives. I doubt you'll choose buckets, so we'll just call them buckets for tonight. Yeah.
So, here are those 4 buckets, and then these are those key areas of focus within them. To really explain to the community, to say, did we hit them right? You as a board, did we get them right? Help them understand what's in there. But in that process, understand that from the district standpoint, we're going to be listening very intently because it's going to inform us on those actions as a district that we need to take to make those happen. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so we'll go to the staff as well to get, and by staff, I'm talking, the cabinet, the principals. This will get pushed out to our teachers. Everybody will get some eyes on this, because what's super important through this is that everybody understands through 1 and 2 what you as a board really were talking about. Does that make sense? Because they're going to be very broad, and we have to make certain that everybody has that same definition, because that's where it can get lost. From that then, once we go through it and you all kind of take time to process it and say, yes, you know what, 1 and 2 are done, it's released to the staff, to me, and my staff to work on those other items, all right? Then we'll bring it back to you, and it's not that you vote then on it, but it's back to explain, here's the work we're going to do, so that you clearly understand, here are those areas, and this is what the staff and I are going to work on over time, and here's how we're going to measure its success. All right? At that point, then, we can start talking about. So I want to remind those of you that were on the board when I first began, if you remember, I came in with those 3 priorities. And then about 2 months in, I brought in, I think it was communication. Here's how we're messaging. This is the work. And then I brought in, hey, now we're going to talk about student and staff mental health. And then I brought in, let's talk about recruitment and retention. I was giving you updates. That's part of this process then, is that every year you'll get an update from us, and we'll go into, here's the work, here's what it looks like, and we'll set sort of a calendar for it. That total scorecard is really going to inform not only the district improvement plan, but it's going to inform the campus improvement plan. And Dr. Gibson and I were talking right before this about, he calls them cascading scorecards, but it's really about taking those scorecards and in the departments and in the divisions for them to take it then and see how their work connects to the larger picture. So the example I gave Dr. Gibson, just so you all understand it, is one of my staff members a while ago, in a department, they were in benefits, and, they didn't really see how they help instruction. And so I had gotten an email from a teacher who had cancer. I don't know if y'all remember, for some of you, I may have told this story, but she wrote this beautiful email about how our benefits were so good that when she was sitting in a room with another teacher who had cancer, there were 3 levels of treatment. Because our benefits package was so good, she had all 3 choices. The other district had 1. And what she explained in this email so eloquently was, because our benefits package was so good, it allowed her to focus on getting better, to get back to the classroom faster, which meant her students benefited. And I said, see, this is how the choices you're making connect to that classroom. That's this cascading component of this. So there's a lot of work in this. I mean, there really is, for the district and for us, but it's the right work. If you flip over to the next page, I just gave you a kind of a conceptual phase 1 and then a phase 2. So you see, define the district scorecard items 1 and 2, and then we go to the community and staff to provide input. Then we come back to you as a board to refine and adopt the district scorecard, so those items 1 and 2. Then we go out, draft key actions, that's the staff and I doing it. Then we come back in to really share. It says adopt them, that's really us, but it's to share with you what we're going to do. Then you see, once that scorecard is there's a decision point then, is when you look at this, so think about that strategic plan, right? Think back to it. At that point, it's like, now that you have this scorecard, do we need a bond to make any of this stuff happen? I don't know what you're going to choose, so I have no idea the answer. But that's that point where you stop and say, okay, we've said these 4 buckets are important. Here are those key pieces. Here's the actions. Do we need a bond to make it happen? So rather than setting a number where we can feel comfortable with, it's not about what we want. It's about what do we need, if anything. I don't know the answer. Maybe we need nothing. Maybe we do. But that scorecard's going to help us inform that moment in time. The last page I'll show you is the piece where it says Phase 1 scorecard. I want you to know this. As you see here, that in January, define the district scorecard, then February, seek community and staff input. Please understand, this is about as malleable as it comes. What I described to Ms. Caldwell and to Dr. Gibson, the process is what's important. If we are true to the process and take time, because sometimes you need more time to reflect, more time to do, then the product is solid. If we set arbitrary timelines to say, well, we're going to get it done by the end of the month, but we need more time to reflect and to fine-tune, well, then we take more time to reflect and fine-tune it. Because at the end, the product will be solid if we followed a great process. Does that make sense? So I don't want you to think that those are set in stone. They're not. We have Dr. Gibson coming back on the 20th, but if we haven't, we, being you all, need more time, well, then we'll make more time for you to continue to go through it. Same with community input. If we need more time, we'll take a little more time. We don't want to rush it so that people don't have time to reflect and retweak and modify, if that makes sense. All right? So,
And Covey called that measure twice and cut once. And so get the measurements correct and then cut once. And I think that's what you're describing. And I couldn't agree more. I think it's good what you have to have a general could progress at this, but to say that let's don't get, sideways if we don't hit the exact targeted timeline.
Right.
Yeah, especially if it's because there's reflective thinking. A group says, hey, we need 30 days. Let us think about this for 30 days to give you a more robust, set of feedback.
Well, and like we talked earlier, I mean, what you're developing or beginning to develop this evening is really for the next 10 years. So what does 4 extra weeks matter when you look at 10 years? So don't, I mean, that's just like I said, it's a potential. That doesn't mean that's how it's going to happen. It's just to give us all more, don't focus on months, focus on that's the next step in the process. Okay? Any questions for me before Dr. Gibson takes it over? I think I wanted to give you all a takeaway to sort of understand the whole thing. Make sense? Yep. Okay. Thank you.
10
Thank you, Dr.
years
Gibson.
is not an arbitrary number thrown around, because typically a scorecard guides somewhere around 5 years. Like today, people used to make 20-year plans, and you could do that 30 years ago. Now a 5-year plan is a very long plan. However, typically with a balanced scorecard, my observation is that, let's say it's a 4 or 5 year plan, usually you don't do an absolute do-over after 5 years. You take the current version and say, is it still applicable? Is it still viable? And so the second 5 year becomes like a tweak of the first 5 years. And my experience in my last district was it was upped actually for a third iteration with some tweaks. And then I was in the middle of that third iteration when I announced my retirement, and I think I shared the story with you. I felt pretty proud when the board had hired a company to find my replacement, and I was pretty much just the caterer and the concierge at that point, and I was happy to be that. But in the headhunter office, came down and knocked on the door. I was just sitting up there while the board was, doing their thing to find my replacement. And the headhunter said, they're saying that the new superintendent doesn't need to create a new strategic plan. Y'all are in the middle of one. Almost like shocked. And I said, that's about right. Sounds about right. Okay, so they're not crazy? Like that's correct. We're in the middle of one. So it made me feel good because the board was committed to the last 2 years of that third set of 4-year plans and the new superintendent, I happened to know once they were hired, and he couldn't believe it either. Am I really, I don't have to come in? And I said, no, I'm pretty sure they're good with what you have. And so I get 24 months to kind of feel it out before, and I said, that's exactly right. And then it's really probably due for a overhaul, like almost let's just set all that aside after 12 years, but you get 2 years to come in to get the feel for it before you have to do the complete overhaul. So anyway, that's just one way to kind of look at this in real terms. And I know I don't have a tendency to share, my work as a superintendent. I share that, and I'm happy to share that. And I had 3 good superintendencies. And I know that I've mentioned to you all that during the last 15 years, I was a national Baldrige examiner, and I'm only giving you this for some context for tonight. I was a judge or a examiner for a while, and then I later became a judge. So as an examiner, we were walking into a hospital, in Memphis, Tennessee, that had applied for a National Baldrige Award. And we didn't ask for the scorecard, but we asked for their strategic direction. Well, the first time I perked up about a balanced scorecard is after going to 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different locations doing site visits. When I asked that question as an examiner, they handed me the balanced scorecard. And they were all different, but the structure was the same. So it made me think, well, okay, there's got to be a best practice for the structure then. So tonight we're going to share the best practice for the structure, which is consistent. We were doing the board training, as y'all know, and then Dr. Micah started saying, let me show you, my thoughts on the scorecard, and that's kind of where this merged. And it's like, okay, well, you're following a best practice. This is consistent with best practices on getting that voice of community and voice of staff. And my belief is that if you go into that meeting, I'm supporting what Dr. Micah just said. If you go in with a blank piece of paper, as opposed to something already worked on by the strategic team, and then do a value add, you run the risk of having a strategic plan that's 50 pages long with 150 things that are just as important as everything else, and nothing can really get measured and get done. You run the risk of that because you went in, you can't blame them because you went in with a blank piece of paper and said, fill this blank piece of paper up. Now you feel obligated to give all that back to them, right? I think this structure is more reflective of a best practice where the strategic team and the tactical team have collaborated and listened to the customer and to the staff and done value add sessions, but then come with a tighter, because ultimately the goal here is 4 buckets. They're not called buckets, but 4 buckets. And Dr. Mike and I were talking earlier about the definition of the word key. So there's some, like if you say, what are the key things we need to know? Well, if you read the long definition, if you want, the way I remember it is key means 3. That's the easy. So you just told me 100 things. What are the 3 most important things out of those 100 things you just told me? It's actually easier to spit out the 100 things than it is to discern what the 3 most important things are. So when you think about, we're going to see the word key in this sample scorecard, think about 3. So 4 buckets, 3 key objectives for each of the 4 equals 12. So you're taking probably 1,000 ideas that out there that may be perceived as the best 1,000 ideas, and you're saying, we think that they can fit in these 12 objectives. So the work, and that's why it may take a little while to get those 12 things right, especially if you're going out and listening, bring it back to the board and the senior leader team and do value add. Yes, sir.
Right, and Dr. Gibson, because the key to the 12 is because when you move over into the next area, that 12 becomes...
Right, it's times 3.
Right, see? So
because you're going to say, what are the key strategic actions that associate with those 3?
See? So that's why it's so important that you get as succinct and hyper-focused in those 3 places, because then they're going to expand. Each one will expand out by 3.
Now the tactical team, we're in their role at that point. That team can handle 3 times 3. You've hired them to be able to handle 3 times 3. Where boards bog down is, and I'm going to get back to and Steve, you probably have, or Mr. Hillard, you probably have the 3 essential roles. I should have copied it from a previous visit. For this meeting and the next meeting, really thinking about those 3 strategic roles, the 3 essential roles, the strategic role, the tactical role, and the operational role. You remember like the chart with the 3 blue boxes. The thing, I knew you would. So, and it's in your material from an earlier visit, and I'm going to hold this up as a prop, and I'll hand it back to you at the end of the night. So, I guess what I want to say is, during this development, and then once the scorecard is deployed, the thing that the trustees have to get good at is the senior leader team they're going to bring us information to share that's at the tactical level, because as trustee we have the right to hear that. But how do you sit at the strategic level and ask the right question about something that's a tactic that you've turned over to the experts? And the short answer to that is it's a very short list of questions that you really should ask as a trustee. Y'all remember me saying I would leave being the superintendent here and drive to Austin, and I was a TRS board member. So I would go from like 1,000 questions I would ask any day, as a superintendent, to about 5. How do we know that's the right work? How do we know that aligns to our strategic objective? How are we measuring that that's truly being effective? Like I had about 10 questions that I just kept on a cue card in front of me when I became a board member, 45 minutes after I left Schertz. So the 1,000 questions I was used to asking came down to but that's staying at the strategic role. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But when we went in as a Baldrige examiner, just so you all know, and this is just a little background and frame of reference, high-performing organizations, 99.9% of the time handed me a scorecard, as an examiner when we asked for it. And then our job as examiners was to let the senior leader team describe what the scorecard meant to them. And then we asked them to not accompany us, and we went to the front line and said, on your scorecard, it says that your key strategic action related to this objective, and it didn't mean that they need to have the scorecard memorized, But they needed to, when those words were being said, and sometimes they would say, wait, say that again. So I'm at a assistant nurse in ward number 3. And, and it would click. She'd say, oh, you're talking about, well, come back to the nurse's station. Let me show you our dashboard on how we're tracking direct connection. And they, oh, got it. It's deployed all the way to it's not just the charge nurse on floor number 4 that knows it. Sometimes it was just the charge nurse that knew it, right? And then sometimes it was all the nurses, and then sometimes it was the nurses' assistants. And in some rare occasions, it was the volunteers. But that took time, right? We're talking years of just staying acutely focused on those objectives. They had heard them so many times, they were just second nature. The biggest challenge with leadership is not coming up with enough stuff to do, it's coming up with the short list of the right stuff to do and measure it and be able to communicate that we got it right. This can and should be completely consistent with your DIP and your SIP. Those are required documents. I like to say that column 2 of the scorecard is your executive summary of your district improvement plan. Now you have an executive summary. You've got a list, that should be the district improvement plan. I knew in SCUC after 2 or 3 years when they came forward and said, are you okay if the DIP's not 85 pages long and it's only 25 pages long? Yes, now I think we've come of age. We're getting it right. Now, what we will not embed in a balanced scorecard are all the compliance-related things, and those are, I don't mean to be flippant about them or minimize them. They're really important. Federal funds, you have to have them embedded in there, but those are almost copy-paste. You don't have to create that stuff. It's like these are bumper rails that they've put around you if you receive federal funds. So you don't have to create that stuff. So to take the energy to go out and work with the board and then work with the community and staff, that should not be on compliance stuff. It should be on the aspirational stuff and the fewest amount of aspirational things that we can work on. So kudos to this.
And if I add one last thing. So the last piece that I failed to mention but is important, when Dr. Gibson was here the last few times, you all were talking about board agendas, right? And see, this scorecard then will be about, if it's not one of those 4 buckets, then why are we having it on our agenda? You all shouldn't be spending your time with it. It's the wrong stuff that I'm bringing you. Do you see? So it keeps us as well focused, and you all, on here's the right things that we're always working on. It really becomes the document that drives everything. So then if, Dr. Gibson was describing to me before this that as a superintendent, he had a folded up copy in his pocket and he would unfold it. And I said, see, that's it. That's how I envision it. Like if I'm sitting in a meeting, okay, where does this tie to this scorecard? And if it doesn't, then why are we talking about this? Help me understand how this connects to the work we need to be doing, because it helps everybody consistently and routinely have this feedback loop of, okay, if I'm focused on priority 4, how does that fit? All right, this is it. How am I measuring it? How does it do? Now coming back. So it's that constant feedback loop that we're doing the right stuff so that we're not being off over here doing something that we attended a training in Dallas, and oh my gosh, this is so neat, but it really doesn't tie to any of the work we're doing, so why are we doing it anyway? And it also helps me as I sit and I'm looking at, even in our budget, how does it tie to our priorities? Does it directly tie to these 4? Then if it doesn't, then why are we putting money there? It helps give me some of those pieces to say this isn't the stuff our board expects from you. Or from us.
And then you're not just cutting budgets, you're strategically abandoning things that don't align to your objectives. That's different than everybody cut your budget 10%.
Right.
I mean, and sometimes that's healthy in organizations, sure. But to strategically abandon something that doesn't align, that's a much better approach.
Right, because as I've said to my staff several times as I've described this isn't just about us picking the right work, it's also stop doing the wrong work.
Yep, thank you.
Stop spending so much time because this, I know you love it or do, the analogy I use all the time because I'm old is way back when I first started teaching, everybody taught a unit, you'll laugh, on dinosaurs. And then we moved from the essential knowledge or the
essential elements
yeah. to the teaks. And all of a sudden, I think it was only second grade could teach dinosaurs, but everybody was mad that they could no longer teach dinosaurs.
That is a true statement.
Correct.
Yes.
It is. I mean, I remember it vividly. But what it did is, it just, everybody went back to, the TEKs say this, so this is what you're supposed to be teaching. This isn't about you teaching your favorite stuff. This is about you teaching the key elements that need to be taught. That's what this document does, is it just refocuses everybody on. These are the things that our board expects from the district.
So
And then we report it to our community.
And sorry, I stepped on your words, but you gave me the cup of coffee, so I'm caffeinated, and it's your fault. I'm going to Lampasas, so I'm just 2 hours, and I'll sleep a while. So, so I just had one cup. I won't have another one. But the one thought that you, Dr. Micah, so there may be some, as you embark on this, that say this is going to hinder innovation. Now, I would make, in the sense that we're getting it so narrow, so I would make a case for the opposite. Because if the what and the when is not questionable, that frees me up to look at the how. And you're really not going to be focusing on the how. You're just getting clarity about the what, and then by when do we need to move the needle on it. It opens up innovation, because somebody may come up with a way to get it accomplished that you're going to go, well, if it hits that objective and it gets it done before our timeline, then okay, let me look at it. Let's see what, and so there's two things there. One is innovation's not inhibited, but then it's something to test innovation against, instead of just to do it because I went to this conference and they gave me a nice steak and a big margarita and, said this is the best, teacher resource, around. Not that happens in Northeast ISD or any other district that I'm aware of. Peter Singhi, and I know I'm kind of a nerd about him, but and back to your comment about taking the time to do it right. I love that he says one sound strategic decision can answer 10,000 future questions. So if you take the time up front to get it right, you've eliminated potentially thousands of questions in the future. So back to your let's get it right by doing these feedback loops. Okay, we have a sample scorecard. I could have picked, we're helping about 80 districts with scorecards right now, so I could have given you, all of them would have had the same structure. I want to have a list of like 10 things in my mind on clarifiers right now. This is just arbitrarily picked. Like I just picked one on purpose, because I didn't want it to, like I thought about Northeast and I picked one, for Northeast. I literally just picked one out of the batch so you could look at it. They'll all be slightly different, but they'll also have two main components. The top part, which in this case, the sample you're looking at is gray, is where you put your mission and vision and either core values or beliefs. Because you should always have that as kind of I'm looking at a compass on the wall behind you. You should kind of have a compass on that, in Baldrige terms, and let me just use Baldrige terms, mission, vision, values. Everything should line up to mission, vision, values. One of the questions sometimes we would ask is, how does, strategic objective 3.3 align up with your mission, vision, and values? That would be a question we'd ask. Okay, so that's there. Y'all are going to talk later about how to work on that approach. That's not a part of tonight. So then moving below that, a scorecard, and this is a note-free thing, so you're just kind of, that way it's just like the most important thoughts off the top of my head. So 5 columns. We half-jokingly a while ago called column 1 the buckets. The proper term, and let me go back about 25 years, Robert Kaplan at Harvard Business School was one of the first ones to put out this concept of a balanced scorecard. And, it's as a best practice for organizations. And I'm drawing a blank, but a gentleman joined him in 1991 to start working on it in public education. Or in education, or nonprofits. Could this work in nonprofits? So it's got about a 20 or 30 year best practice, research background to it. So the 5 columns are, and I'm going to just run through them, but your perspectives. And the reason we use the word perspective, the example you have used, cornerstones. Many districts say priorities. Some districts call those goals in column 1. But it's these 4 big areas. Now, in the first iteration of scorecards, they were for-profit organizations. So let me ask you, of those 4 perspectives, which one of the 4 do you think was the first? Look at the 4 perspectives on your sample. Which one do you think, in for-profit organizations, which one would be first? Finance, that's right. Number 4, because it's for-profit. So our rationale, and consistent with Kaplan and Houston, that's the name I was trying to retrieve earlier, is in nonprofit, you flip, and it's on the scorecard because it's critical. But it's not your number 1. Now you all want to make a case that students don't need to be number 1. I doubt it. You know, knowing you and knowing this district, that seems pretty self-evident, right? So you've got students on top, and by the way, we're not saying that they're listed in order of importance, but people read it that way, right? So whatever priority 1 is, that's what they're going to think is most important. I think this order is logical, that you have students first, staff second, community or customers third, and finance fourth. So one question, I guess, here along the way is, can you think of a perspective other than those 4, that all of the work or strategic objectives that we're going to talk about in just a second, would they all fit in those 4 perspectives? And I'm really framing that as a question. Can you, let me rephrase it. It's a repeat with a little bit of a tweak. Anything to add to those 4 perspectives, or any of those need to go?
Yeah. No, I do.
Would you agree with the order of them?
I have this one hesitation. And it's not because oh, sorry. I forgot, I apologize. And not even a hesitation, maybe just a food for thought. You know, in family dynamics are all different, but in some family, well, in my family, if the foundation isn't strong, how can we raise our children to be strong? And that can be too for a single parent. And so just food for thought. If we don't have staff and teachers, the best teachers, to implement all of our mission statement and our values so that our kids can then thrive, I don't know. I'm a little not hesitant. I just had that little thought in my mind that because the students will be here. Right. The numbers may vary, but the students will be here.
I'm following your rationale. How many teachers do you have? 8?
Around 4,400.
Okay, so you got 4,500 teachers. My gut feeling is if you went to 4,500 teachers and said the order is staff, student, community, finance, they're going to say no way.
I know they're going to say no.
They're going to say students are first priority. That's
I know
my
they
gut.
are.
I hear your rationale, though.
I just don't want it to be, and maybe it's the order thing that bothers me. I don't want it to be that it's less important, that the staff is less important, and maybe that's what it is. I don't necessarily like, I understand the process, because the financial piece, although very important, we are here to educate kids and
Right.
to help kids thrive and become successful in whatever life choices they make. But I don't think one is necessarily more important than the other.
I don't-
Do
Right.
you have to number them?
No, you do not.
So
That's
could you just have
Across the line.
student achievement?
Yeah, it's just going to be difficult because the question's going to arise, what priority are we talking about?
Okay.
You know, like
Well, then it would
when
be
you're,
student.
because right, you want to be able
Well,
to say
then it-
we're in priority 2 or we're in priority
yeah,
3.
it would
So it's
be
really,
student outcome.
and I'm trying to be really practical.
Yeah.
I've gone down this, and it's just like sometimes, yes, ma'am.
Okay. Sorry, I apologize for being late, but I think I'm caught up. We're talking about the balanced scorecard here.
ma'am.
And I would, and this is just from my perspective, probably switch 3 and 4. In my mind, I think it's important to show financial stewardship, because if you don't have that, how can you expect the community to, or how can you reasonably engage the community?
Right. So these are, so again, I'm showing you, others have done what y'all are talking about. Okay.
Well, we can finish what we're talking about with Mrs. Williams. I was just gonna say, I know what you're saying, Mrs. Winkley, and I was looking at the EdCo Chapter 4, which tells us our responsibilities, and they have the 11 objectives, and the educators are behind the kids as well. And I think
Yeah.
we recognize the kids are the reason we're all here to support that, and not that anyone's less valued, but that becomes the primary, and then everything waterfalls from there. But I know the point you're making too, we don't want anyone to feel less valued, so.
Yeah,
Yep.
and I guess that's it.
And I'm going to,
So, Dr. Gibson, let me put something out there. When I stepped in, I had 3 priorities. I didn't number them.
That's right.
I just said,
Mental health.
here's the order. And I mean, here's my 3 priorities. You know, hire and retain the best, student and staff mental health, and messaging. I never had them in an order. I never said priority 1, priority 2.
That's
They were
right, you
just
didn't.
there.
That's right.
Correct?
That's correct.
So, I mean, to me, I guess I don't want to get hung up, because a balanced scorecard, y'all, they're all important. They
Right.
all have equal importance. There's not one, and if numbering them causes you heartburn, well, then don't. I mean, I guess for me, I'll just say, which priority are we talking about?
Yeah.
Can you tell me that priority? I don't have to be a number.
Student,
If
faculty,
that
stakeholders.
creates heartburn to me, I don't know.
It's just a
That's my-
shorthand for track, is that when you go 1, cornerstone, priority 1 or priority 2, point 2, point 3, as you're doing scorecards, it makes
Right.
it more efficient,
when
maybe.
you get
or
over
simpler.
into, and I don't disagree at all with what you just said, when you get into key strategic actions and you've got 3 objectives now and 3 actions,
absolutely.
it's now you're tracking 9 strategic actions. And it's just like numbers make that easier. I'm just trying to be practical. So, so someone can say, we're on 3.2.A. You see, instead of me reading this whole strategic action out, I'm on 3.2A, or I'm on, you could, well, and you can do it that way. Student achievement, 2A, and not number the first, not say it's priority 1 or priority 2 or priority 3 or priority 4. I hadn't thought about that.
Or
Ms.
short-
Winkley, that's a good idea.
Just student, staff, stakeholders, and spending, or, the 4 S's, because
That's
that's the
right.
4 categories, or financial management without having to put ABC. I mean, there's lots of ways we could come up with that, but
But anyway,
keep it short, though.
This is good because this means that we're really thinking about this. So this is a good discussion because and there is going to be this give and take, and I'm going to kind of stress that on that key strategic action, you're going to have 9 or 12 things in that, and it gets hard to manage that. It gets hard to stay on track when the tactical team's trying to tell you what's going on without saying I'm in 3.2A or I'm in 3.4 whatever. So anyway,
But can I take us back though a minute? I think the initial question was, are these the 4
that's correct.
buckets?
Thank you, Ms. Crum.
So,
Thank you.
Correct. Thank you.
so I think we're trying to get
Yeah.
into some semantics that maybe we need to just go back to say.
Well, he
do-
asked, are you comfortable with the order?
Okay.
That was where that came from.
Okay.
Right.
It
So-
was to answer
well, let
your
me go back to, before we address that again, to what Ms. Groen is saying. Are these the 4 things?
Are these the 4 things? Because I think that's what we.
Student, staff, you said student, staff, stakeholder, finance.
The
Or
big
that's
4.
a short
And that's what I
version.
think we talked about last time. To me, it seems like those are the 4 big pillars of POTS where we can then break out and let Dr. Micah get down to the tactical and operational pieces. I think, to me, it makes sense based on what we've seen and discussed and reading the good governance.
Yeah, and so we had a little discussion before with Dr. Micah. Those are the standard perspectives. Do you want me to just erase column number 2 from a sample? I mean, that was my question, and we kind of went back and forth. There's some benefit to erasing that, but then I don't think it hurts for you to look at a district that worked 90 or 100 days to, and by the way, this one's also pretty consistent, and I'm not saying it's right, I'm just saying it's consistent over probably 30 or 40 other districts, if that makes sense. So I just wanted you to see like a pretty typical sampling of how they define
Dr.
column
Gibson, I
two.
guess my question, I don't know who else, have you seen any other set of ISDs come up with I'll call it a fifth one or a different one than these four main areas and consistently apply it across more
Well,
than onesie twosies?
Yes, absolutely. I'm only sharing the ones that I work with because as a Baldridge judge, I know these are the five things you have to have.
Okay.
And that's kind of like drilled into my head. So that's why my recommendation is so it's column 1, the perspectives, column 2, the objectives, column 3, the inputs or the actions, column 4, the outputs, not outcomes, outputs, the leading measures, and then what's the ultimate outcome? What's the big number we're trying to move in this? So I'll go back through it again. So you got to have a perspective, like your 4 big buckets, and then you have the objectives, key strategic objectives, and then you have the key strategic actions that align to the key strategic objectives, and then you have your lead measures, column 4, your lead measures on how do we know we're making progress on those in a typically less than annual cycle, tighter than a year, how do we know? And then the last column are your outcomes, or your lag measures, or your summative measures that in education typically are expressed in an annual number. And what's really good about this that I know is important to Northeast ISD, you may decide in this process that some state standardized number may be the best number, but there may be another number that best expresses your annual outcome. Does that make sense? Or we're going to look at the two. We're going to look at the state number, and then a lot of districts are writing CCMR strategic objectives. Well, it's hard not to ignore, or it's hard to ignore, rather, the state CCMR number when it's based on industry-based certifications. It's hard not to look at that and go, yeah, that's a pretty good measure for whether we're getting that done. But there may be other components to CCMR that are more important. Okay, so that, absolutely.
Is it better for these to be more general? So for instance, Cornerstone 1 says student achievement. Should it just be student?
Well,
And then your,
oh, I hear you. Yeah.
like, should it be less, like, number 2, really, faculty and staff recruitment, retention, and capacity building? I mean, I guess I'm just
Yeah.
trying to say, should that topic
So
be
here-
more general, or
And
should it be?
that's a really good question. So probably, this is my experience, and again, I'm not saying it as the way. I'm just, the boards, 2 of them that I worked with, utilizing this process, got very comfortable at saying, we use the word priorities. I'm not trying to make a case for priorities, but we have 4 priorities. And student achievement, like it wasn't just student, staff, stakeholder, finance, although there's nothing wrong with that. It was student achievement, staff satisfaction. I mean, do you see, it kind of had, now I'm not saying that's the way it has to be, but you have to think about it when we're just talking about this. Now I kind of like Mr. Hillier a while ago, you almost rattled them off a while ago without glancing down, student, staff, stakeholder, finance, because it's just so clear
Yeah, I think
and
when
succinct.
When he
I
had
think you said
the
4
one,
S's.
Or
Yeah, kind of
spending, but it's
Spending.
finance, because that's kind of what we talked about last time when you were here, but the 4 S's is just an
kind
easier
of the one,
Right.
mnemonic to
one word.
remember.
And so again,
Summary
not making a
stuff.
case for anything, it's just when we're talking about it, what's the best way for this to anchor?
Because it carries down to the lowest level when you talk about, does the person at the front line
Yeah.
know what the message is and can tie it to that? But, and I think back to Mrs. Granish, your questions, I think sometimes broader, because we're at the strategic level, is we're leaving that technical trait space down to Dr. Mike and the staff after we get to we have the key area, and then we'll get our key objectives, and then the technical gets down into there. So we've given them the umbrella without getting it too wordy, but there's that fine thing, maybe more than just student. It could be student academic achievement, but whatever we decide is
I think for
the best
now,
balance.
less is best.
Yeah.
And if you're comfortable with student, staff, now, do you like stakeholder? Some people use customer, some people use community.
And as we go through the objectives, it may inform us to go back
Correct.
and, if we may just say students, and then we go through the objectives and say, well, we want these to be actually student achievement.
Correct.
And
But for your purposes
Fine-tune
right
that.
now, Dr. Micah, probably the more general, the better. Because, do you think?
And I think last
Well,
time, Mr. Williams-
but I think again, so I'm going to go back to what you and I were talking about before. We can't get so caught up on making it perfect that it leads to inaction. Do you see?
Here,
This
here.
this has to lead to action. And so there's a balance here because again, whatever you all commit to doesn't mean, like I said, you know, if achievement gives you, maybe it's student outcomes down the line. You just talk about outcomes. That way then it's, because I think for some people achievement instantly gets them to STAR, right? Instantly to academics. Well, that's important. But there are other outcomes such as CCMR, such as these other factors that you may wish to consider, and you want us in that strategic, as we get into the actions, for us to actually incorporate in. So, you know, I think for now we can just say student, staff, stakeholders, and that, and then you guys can massage that out, because remember, Dr. Gibson comes back the January the 20th. Tonight's really to get you all really focused on this, to give you time to think through it, to reflect, and then come back, and really that night of the 20th is to refine some of these things if you can get there. But remember, the process is, and if, hey, we decide, by we, I mean you all, if you decide the 20th, hey, you know what, we just need a little more time, well, then we'll take a little more time to give you the time to get where you're comfortable. Because again, to Dr. Gibson's piece, like, look, y'all, you know, those 3 priorities, when I said them, they were always so easy to rhyme off because I kept them short and succinct. You got to think about choosing words, because remember, semantics are so important, that everybody has a common definition of, if you say, call it student achievement, student outcomes, or whatever, that we all understand as a board and as a district and as a community what you meant by student outcome.
I think,
Makes
Dr.
sense?
Micah, that makes total sense. And Mr. Bauer and Hilder, I think that's consistent with leave it very generic. Let's listen, and then maybe we need to name it something once we've done all the listening.
Agreed.
I mean, maybe there's a word or a phrase, the phraseology, then you've got your 4 priorities. But yeah, I think, so if everybody's comfortable with student, staff, stakeholder, by the way, the definition of stakeholder is anyone, any organization or person that has an interest in the outcomes of your institution.
I think we had this conversation last time because Mr. Williams made a good point, because initially you said shareholder, which was the
That's the
profit side.
for-profit.
And then we talked about it in community and that. And I think you, Mr. Williams, said, hey, I think stakeholders, because there is
That's correct.
Everybody in the community has a different piece, whether you're a taxpayer,
Right.
parent, you know.
I
community.
apologize that I made that sound like that was my thought, because
No,
it
no,
was your
I mean,
idea,
I
but I'm
remember-
in
I
a lot
remember
of
that
districts. I'm in
specifically
4 districts this week, so thank you for reminding me. We've already talked about that.
Why are you trying to take my ideas?
Because it was a good one. It's why. Okay, so for perspectives, you know, we've got them outlined. And by the way, perspectives, do not use that word, but let's wait. I think let's just call them that for now. It's a very generic term. No matter what we decide to call at the end of this listening and learning with the community and staff, column 2, by definition, they are your key strategic objectives. I just want you to know that. That, by definition, that's what they are. Whatever you decide, this one I chose, they decided to call them critical success factors. That's a real big Harvard Business School term. I like it a lot. It doesn't align well with a DIP, you know, so it's a semantic thing with that. So some districts are choosing performance objective because it aligns with their DIP. But just know that column 2 are your key strategic objectives. That's what those are. And key means what? 3. So if you can stick to 3, to me, that's the classical definition. Usually most districts stick with key strategic actions. And what's implied there are the key strategic actions aligning to this key strategic objective. I mean, obviously, and then progress measures and output measures. Okay, so big picture of the concept of a scorecard. Everybody good with that? So the next little bit for a few minutes is you have an overview of 6 indicators, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And do you all remember you took a team trust and then you took a good governance inventory and then we probed the team trust a little bit more. Well, that middle one in there that I think we debriefed the last time I was here, y'all had a relatively strong good governance inventory, your self-reflection. My recollection is some of the ones that you had that were yellow or orange were actually in indicator 1 and 2. When you deploy a balanced scorecard, you check almost every box in indicator 1 and 2. So you were truthful when you said, I don't know, or no, we don't do that. That was an honest response. But the good news is a year from now, when this is fully deployed, you'll be able to take that again and you'll just, yeah, we've got that. Yeah, we've got that. Yeah, we've got that. That would be my hope for Northeast ISD. However, as Dr. Mike and I were just kind of chit-chatting about, laying out this base version of the scorecard, he had run across this document and he said, well, what is that primer for setting and adopting the strategic plan? So I shared, now you remember in most of the districts we're working with, we don't have a superintendent that's already started the process, if that makes sense to you. Dr. Mike has already, he had started this way before I got here. So here this is. So, but yet at the same time, I think this primer 1, the purposeful leadership in the strategic, or I'm sorry, indicator 1, setting and adopting the strategic plan. So primer 1 is setting the scorecard, and then primer 2 is deploying the scorecard. That's the difference in the two of them. We're not going into deploying the scorecard. I think Dr. Micah might have alluded to earlier, when we get through the setting, if there's questions about the deploying, I'm happy to share that. I wanted you to have a copy of it so you could see what the difference is. But we're looking at indicator 1 primer. This primer, now I'm holding up Mr. Hillard's piece of paper again, is all about how do you set the scorecard and have curiosity about what's going on in the tactical role, but stay in the strategic role. That's what this is all about. And if I'm curious about a question at the tactical level, am I staying cognizant of a trustee that I'm at the strategic level, but I want to ask Dr. Micah? And one of the safest things, is to ask a question. I think the Lone Star governance training is all about asking good questions, which I love. I think that's excellent. So how does a trustee ask a good question? So a good question to me for a board member, let's kind of begin with the end in mind, is at the back of number 6 on the second page of that indicator. How do we know if that measure is aligned with the appropriate objective? How do we know if that action is aligned with an objective? Do our strategic objectives reflect the community needs? How do we know we are moving the needle in the right direction on any given strategic objective? Like, those are the types of questions that are the questions, not did Miss So-and-so in 4th grade at blank elementary get the opportunity to talk? That's like at the sub-level of the sub-level of the sub-level, and that's really the tactical role. So Dr. Micah, with your permission, I know this board knows how to read. I think it would be good if I just skirted through pretty quickly, and then you just pause me, and I'm going to be looking down a lot, so just say, hey, or hit your microphone or something, or I have a question. But this 22-point checklist, I'm a big fan of checklists, just read the checklist manifesto, and I think this is kind of the way my brain works, but I think this is a really good checklist, just keeping in mind this is about how do we do our part and stay in the strategic role. Okay, and again, I know you know how to read, but I'm on the how part with the 22-point checklist. So the strategic role collaborates with the tactical role. That's why we probe team trust. Trust is there. We have to be able to trust the superintendent. Superintendent's got to be able to trust us, or collaboration doesn't happen. All work travels at the speed of trust, to borrow a Covey term. Second one, board collaboratively ensures that the perspectives, objectives, actions, lead measures, and lag measures are aligned. What's the action verb? Third word in that one. What is it? Ensures. Does it say creates or right? You get it? So it's governance, the classic definition of governance, the oversight of management, not management. So you're a trustee. Assurances and insurances are what you're trusted with, not the doing of it. All right, the third one, strategic objectives account for the cultural needs of the community and the operational role. So at the same time, at the strategic level as a trustee, you're looking out into the community. You're also checking, with the tactical team, how would this be perceived at the front line or the operational role? It's not to say go to the operational role and ask the question yourself, but it's ask the question of how did we probe this with the front line? So you look out to the community because you get elected by the community, right? So you're looking out to the community, and then you're asking probing questions. So it's like strategic role, tactical role. We did that community forum, or I heard that as feedback at a community meeting. That's your job to kind of reflect some of that. It's not to say I am going to go do my own survey at blank elementary to see if this is really working. That's the tactical's role, but you have the right obligation, not right, to, when you're deploying this, to just inquire how is that working at the front line, or what are we hearing, or how do we quantify the work at the front line on that. All right, number 4, most of your energy in the creation of this should stick with column 2, right? When we spend a little energy tonight on column 1, so your energy is on column 2. And I want to go ahead and say this right now, even though it didn't necessarily fit here. When this is ultimately done at whatever month on the timeline it hits, the board, and I think I may have already said this to you all, but the board should only approve the column 1 and column 2. You should not approve column 3, 4, and 5. Does that make sense? Because the tactical team may need to change column 3 at any given notice. Pivot, the most overused word in 2021. So they may need to pivot. If the board has adopted column 3, you had a board item now, we need to pivot on item 3.2A2, and it just bogs it down. This is why the measure twice, cut once, get column 2 correct, and then hear reports from column 3, but don't adopt column 3. Now, some boards, after a couple of years of deployment, feel comfortable with adopting column 5. Now think about that for just a second. So why would they get comfortable with adopting column 5, like voting on column 5? And why would I only say it happens after a couple of years of work?
Is it because you have your outcomes? By then you should have your data and know
That's right.
whether or not.
It's your clarity about the outcomes.
And you know whether or not the programs or whatever actions you've taken are working.
That's right. And so for a couple of years, there has to be grace to the tactical team to say that outcome that we've articulated is our best estimate at this time. But as we deploy this, and we're not going to wait for it to be perfect to deploy it, we just heard that, and I think that's wise. So you don't approve typically column 5 until later, and you may never want to, but you can, but you never approve column 3 and column 4. I want everybody, does that make sense? Like never, never, never. That's a best practice. I'm sharing a best practice to never approve column 4 and column 5. I'm sorry, column 3 and column 4. Makes sense because that's the tactical team. Okay, so the board, and you're doing this right now, number 5, you set the tone for continuous improvement by modeling continuous improvement with good governance. So you're doing that with the work that we've done the last 2 or 3 meetings. Number 6, the board makes sure its good governance actions and planning are systematic as a role model. 5 and 6 and 7 actually all go together. Board and superintendent partnerships, high degree of trust. We've probed that. You've kind of gotten the green light for whatever it's worth from me that you're ready for this work based on the data that you submitted to me. Number 8, you model trust and collaboration, and then that sets an expectation to it. Now, I worked in a district last night that the superintendent was ready to deploy the scorecard. So 5 months later from where you are right now, and my recommendation that they solicited from me last night was to not deploy it until they got their team trust and their good governance better. Because it was going to be a false sense of we've launched the strategic plan and then the sabotage and killing each other and, cutting each other off at the knees. And then it was going to get blamed on the strategic plan. And I'm serious, I said, no, do not vote on it tonight. You've got another few months to work on team trust and trust issues on the board before I think you should adopt it. And they accepted it. Fortunately, there was a pregnant pause for sure after I said it, and I kind of let it sit there. And I'm going to make sure I say this tonight, you're not in that situation. Like, we probed this already with your trust and your governance. I mean, at least what you expressed on your inventory. Now, if it was accurate, then I'm saying you have the green light. If there's some things that are still brewing, which may be common for any human organization, you need to get those resolved as you work on this, because they'll fester up, and then it's hard for the superintendent and the tactical team to know, is this really a strategic plan issue or is it just a board dynamic issue? It's hard, that stuff starts getting melded together and they're having trouble figuring out. Okay. So number 9, the board charges the superintendent and the tactical team to get input from the community. Okay, already happening. 10, the board ensures that the data aligns to the balanced scorecard, but they also consider that there's a cultural and a human aspect as well. Now, this is really important. Peter Singh said, any asset carried to an extreme can and likely will become a liability. So this gets you very data-driven. It should, and that's the beauty of it. We quantify things in order to try to, understand it better. My caution is to just not get so jazzed up about the data that you forget you run a 65,000 human endeavor here, or however many, probably 100,000 when you count the volunteers and PTC and all that. So it's not a case against data. It's a case for data, but data understanding that there's a human element to the work you do also. If we were making this widget that fit on the back of this computer, we could get really data-driven, right? It either fits or it doesn't, it either works or it doesn't, it either lasts or it doesn't. End of story. But this is not that way. We're dealing with human emotions. Their tax dollars, their children, everything that, well, I'm preaching to the choir at this point. Okay. 11, the board ensures that its decisions are data-driven, as we stated before, and then they reflect a selfless, visionary perspective. In other words, you're staying at the strategic role. You're thinking about data as it pertains to the whole organization, not your pet project or not your one thing that you really get focused on. Balanced scorecard, as Dr. Micah said earlier, the balance there is between the 4 perspectives. Don't get too overloaded in one perspective over others, even though we all have passion in one or the other. You've got to model the balance. 12 board members consistently ensure and discuss if they're staying in a strategic role. It should be okay. David Pivito, whom I love very much, one of my past board members, was famous or infamous, one or the other, for saying, is this conversation really in the strategic role at board meetings? It was, and usually he was spot on. Like, we had gotten out of the strategic role, and it wasn't a question when he asked it. It was like, if we don't get this back to the strategic role, I'm going to go home and watch the game. Is what he meant. Or I'm just going to start watching the game right here, which occurred occasionally. But he was serious about the question. Get the conversation back to the strategic role. So that one is just saying you should be okay with kind of, I don't mean calling each other out, but redirecting each other back to the strategic role if you feel like you're not in it. Is that fair enough? Like, there should be that level of collegiality. Okay. The board may set high standards for data collection and research, but they should always charge the tactical team to do it. So trustee really shouldn't say, well, I've done a little bit of my own research, or I've gathered a little bit of my own data. That's a kind of a telltale sign. Because, for one thing, it may be wrong, and then, it may be right, but it could be wrong. But it's basically saying, why do we need the middle box on this page?
Are we really staying in the strategic?
That's right. And so now it's fair for the strategic team to, through the superintendent, to say, is there a measure for something, something, something? And you might go, I don't know. That's a good question. Let me talk to the cabinet next week and And it may be that the data is there, you just haven't aligned it to the objective during a report, or it may be, hey, that was a good idea. Now the reports will reflect that data set. You know, that was a great idea. But it's always to put the data question back to the superintendent, who then, in your case, and in most districts, puts it to the senior leader team. And I would assume board meeting, senior leader meeting, debrief. Okay, I would assume that's the structure, and
Happens the very next morning.
okay. And this structure helps with that, though, because you know what you're talking about and why you're talking about it and why the request was made, right? That's what helps with it. All right, so the board collaboratively sets realistic timeframes. Now we're kind of in the outcome column. By the way, that fifth column, if you're going to move any number, and I'm making up numbers here, from 50 to 70, you don't do that in 1 year. You determine if it's a 5-year plan, then we're going to decide how much gain we need to achieve over each year. And if you'll want, kind of just off the top of my head, most organizations try to gain somewhere between 30 or 50% of the total 5-year gain in year 1. Then they try to get the delta 70% over the remaining 4 years. Because if you just, however, sometimes it may be more prudent, depending on what you're working on, to get a little gain first and then bigger gains later, right?
Well, to put it in a way, and Dr. Gibson and I, we were talking about the DSS. If you look what I shared with you all, right, our district support services survey, you see a really large jump year 1. Then you see a smaller jump year 2,
Yep.
and then these jumps will get smaller and smaller as we incrementally make progress. You can the key though is, and I often explain this to our principals, I don't want to see a large jump because oftentimes that leads to a dip. I want to see this consistent, some gain over time, that we're consistently moving up. Sometimes that might be 3% growth, and sometimes that's 1%, but that we're consistently moving forward, we're not regressing.
Big organizations move at a snail's pace. Big educational organizations really move at a snail's pace. So, and one of sometimes I know that's frustrating to business folk that are on the board. But part of it is that cultural piece that, okay, how do we deploy this to, 200 elementary schools? How do we get, so the tactical team is the one that's immediately thinking, okay, how do we get this, message the right way? So on 14, that's what that's really about. So you're setting a realistic time frame for that outcome, the board is, but that tactical team is listening to the front line and trying to make sure that it's achievable in the right amount of time. So all to say, column 5 is usually split into your 5 years. So you've got the big number, but then you've got what we're going to do in 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, 25, 26. And so that's just something for you all to note. All right, 15, the board monitors organizational performance. They leave individual performance to the tactical team. That's what you've hired them to do. So sometimes boards can just kind of get this mushy between the scorecard and like an individual staff member or principal at a big campus or something. Don't go there. That's up to the tactical team. This is all about organizational performance, not individual performance. 16, the board can discern between data needed for a strategic decision as compared to data that may be needed for a tactical. I know when you deploy this, I have a great deal of confidence. You'll get comfortable with a strategic set of data, this big set of data, and then y'all will probably share these. It gets a little more granular. Let me show you how we get up to that number and how we think we're on the right track. Or you may say why I think we're not on the right track. Let me show you why I think that number at the end of the year, we may not hit it. And what we're trying to do to pivot to get it right. 17, the board ensures that the budget, we talked about that earlier, supports the strategic objectives. The board ensures that it does not leave the strategic role during a formal complaint process. Now, this is really interesting. You do all this work, you get your scorecard done, and then there's a grievance, and everything goes to the wayside. It's very, very common. So I'm just telling you that's very common. So you just have to be aware of that. It happened with me and SCUC a number of times. All of a sudden, we just left all the roles. You know, the roles didn't matter anymore. So just, that's kind of like put that on your radar. The board remembers to celebrate success as well as promote challenging and rigorous outcomes. 20, the board commits to using the scorecard as a primary tool to communicate. Well, this is kind of interesting. It's when you get clarity about these objectives, and these are just random thoughts, Dr. Micah, but you know, there's a board report that's on one of these perspectives in the future, and then maybe the next week there's a community advisory committee meeting to run through the same report and let these community folks kind of hear the report on the scorecard, how we're doing. These are, I'm not saying that's a must. I'm just saying that's a way to use the scorecard as a way to communicate. I mean, I always, at the church chamber, like 90% of the time, I'm going to my mouth with chicken fried steak with gravy on it, or it's in my mouth, and it's, Dr. Gibson, stand up and tell us how the school's going. I mean, you know, like, but I carried a scorecard in my lapel pocket, and I asked the staff, when we made the monthly reports, the things that we spotlighted in the 4 perspectives, I always kept the last list from the last time it was celebrated. So instead of me just kind of coming up with something off the top of my head, I carried that list with me. So I'll just pull it out and just start saying in perspective 1, yes, ma'am.
I think we probably already do this, but I'm just concerned about the messaging, I guess, just to make sure that the expectations of the community when we present or when anyone presents a scorecard is the same, or that we understand their expectations, and we make sure that they understand the scorecard and our expectations, so that it's closely aligned, and that, you know, they're not taking something and misrepresenting or
Right.
thinking one thing, and it's like, well, no, that's not what that means.
That's a really good point, Ms. Williams, and I probably said that just in haste a while ago, not exactly right. So I have the scorecard, I know the scorecard, and trustees actually asked me for that point of pride because they got asked what's going on. So we had those points of pride. I just remember Mr. Westbrook, you know, studying, you know, those priorities. Like, what are you doing? He said, I want these memorized, you know, and it's like, well, that's awesome. So, and he would stand up at a chamber meeting and he would say, we have 4 priorities, and we've celebrated in the last, now, he would articulate the 4 priorities. In other words, our column 1, right? And then he would look at his cue card for the points of pride. And so the message was the same, where, you know, what matter what trustee was at what event, these were the celebrations in the 4 perspectives, and every quarter they changed. You know, like, now what are our big points of pride? And a lot of times it was the lead measures. We hit this number on our midterm that we never thought we would hit, and that's a point of pride. So anyway, those are just thoughts. And Ms. Williams, that's a real good point about consistent messaging.
But is that something that was shared with the stakeholder community as well?
Well, over time, so I want to state that real clearly. Once the comfort was there on the kind of inner workings with the tactical team and the board, then yeah, it became a tool for communication.
Okay.
And it was well received in the business community that we served. I'll just say that. There was a lot of, like, well, it's hard to look at it and not see clear alignment. Most of the concerns I got from other workers, if you will, or business folks, was that, oh my gosh, now my boss wants a balanced scorecard because he heard about yours at the chamber meeting, and now we've got to develop one. That's a good problem to have when people are grumbling because they're wanting to copy you. So the 21 rather, the board understands its public modeling of effective decision making. And 22, the board understands perception and survey data, and that's different. So qualitative data or perception data, you could make the case that that's qualitative rather than quantitative. When you look at those 4 perspectives, especially perspective 2 and perspective 3, a lot of that's going to be qualitative or survey data. Like that's the best data you have, and it's critical. But you usually don't with qualitative data, you usually don't point right to a data point and say, there's the answer. You look at themes and you say, this is what we need to explore more. With quantitative data, you can say, we hit 83. We can talk all day long, but we said we were going to hit 85 and we hit 83. So just that understanding, but the difference between qualitative and quantitative is really important, and perception data. So you can kind of get in the ditch on perception data. It's really about what are you doing with the data and how are you listening and how is it informing what you're saying and then what you're taking back through cycles of improvement. Last time I think we talked about voice of customer and voice of staff, and it's how you use that data to help make your voice of staff stronger and better. So real quick, 6 things we already talked about, number 6, but the first 5, and this is typical for any board. This is what we're kind of teaching statewide. Not kind of, we're teaching statewide. It's tempting to take what you know from your own work experience and assume that it will apply in a school district, no matter what your work is. Just be careful. I'm not saying don't think about it, but just be careful. The strategic role, while powerful, is indirect leadership. And that's hard to grasp sometimes because you run for very specific things and reasons, and then you find yourself in a role that does a lot of the work through the tactical team. And so it's kind of hard to get your hands around that. So again, it's the classic definition of governance. It's the oversight of management, not management. You've hired a manager for the district. All right, the board, number 3, the board often runs for office based on a tactical or an operational issue, and then they either get that one thing solved and they don't know how to get out of that role, or then they realize, wait, that's in the tactical role, and the board norms don't support, them being in the tactical domain, and so then they feel alienated. So just know that's common. Buck likes to say every board member ran for some reason, whether they told you or not. Just try to find out what it is and see if you can do your best, and help them understand the strategic role. The 4th one, I love this, but I think it's true, and this comes from Michael Fullen. It's more fun to dabble in tactics than to think strategically. And it is. Strategic thinking is hard. I mean, it's wrinkles in your brain that you don't access all the time, but you ran for a role on the strategic. So, and I love Peter Singy, if the strategic team is not working on the system, no one is. So the tactical team and the operational team work in the system, right? The tactical team has the job of on the system, in the system, on the system, in the system, because they have to help the strategic team with working on the system. The strategic team should always stay in on the system. You're working on it. There's one of the second episode of Yellowstone, the oldest son that eventually gets killed, Kevin Costner, says, why weren't you at the cell barn shaking hands? And he said, well, I was back here working the ranch. And, he said, I've hired you to run the ranch, not work the ranch. And I just thought that was so great. But he couldn't get out of just the day-to-day work to go shake hands at the cell barn, during the cell. And Kevin Costner was wanting him. So that's kind of the strategic operational. He's stuck in the operational. He can't, he was trying to get him to the strategic. No, that was episode 1. That was episode 1. Okay, I made the mistake last night of sharing what happened Sunday night, and someone hadn't watched it yet, and that was not good.
Is that why I'm so good at my job? I don't actually do the work.
It depends. I don't know exactly what level you work at, but we talked about a common person that was working between our districts that was really good at tactical, but struggled with helicoptering up to get other people to do the work. He just brilliant, hardworking. He just couldn't get up and help 5 people do the work for him, even though that's what he was hired to do. So that's kind of what I'm saying. Okay, and then the last one, the board members incorrectly think that by taking over the tactics from the strategic role that they'll just speed the process up. That, Dr. Mike, is kind of my quick overview. I'm going to do a check on, do we need to take a break? Because I know the other outcome for tonight is to go ahead and talk about those 3 objectives from those 4 perspectives. Push on or a break? Okay, I should have done this first. So I went through those pretty quickly, and I know and I don't like standing at no, I don't. I'm good. I mean, I just kind of shaking my feet out I'm good. No, I'm good. My normal way of being comfortable with sharing information is not what I just did. But at the same time, I just feel like it's important to like just hear all those. It's almost like this anchor, and this guiding light to this process. Do y'all want to, do you have any reflections on what you hear in those 22 point checklist? Anything resonate in particular with you or something you hadn't thought of?
My first thought is it was great to have you review them and for us to be able to chew on it a little bit and maybe see ourselves in some of these numbers, maybe not see ourselves in some of these numbers, but just to be mindful. I think it is a great way for a self-check. Great questions to ask yourself as you go into a meeting. Am I doing this? Have I done this? When you leave a meeting, maybe ask yourself after the meeting. Because I think that, most people that run, all people that run for a board position, I think have great intention. But I think it's easy sometimes to get lost between the strategic and the tactical role, particularly if you have something that you're passionate about, that maybe you don't see eye to eye on how the district runs things or operates, in a sense. So I appreciate the fact that you went through. I made some notes. I highlighted. I underlined.
Okay, good.
I don't know about everybody else, but I think the goal is to remain in that strategic role and to have the trust, like you said, between Dr. Micah and his staff to be able to move forward. If not, we're going to be stuck.
And you may be able to get some results in an environment that doesn't have really good trust, but you can never get all the results you could have if there was trust between within the strategic role and then between the strategic role and the tactical role. And there's the whole Covey book on all that. Y'all know that, and we talked about that the last time. So that's the importance of that. And then, it is hard, and it might shock you that after a couple of meetings, I can probably tell you where your passion is. Yeah. So what I would unsolicited, just remind you and every trustee that we ever talk to is you're really here to ensure there's balance between those four perspectives and not only and that's hard sometimes because you probably ran for, one of the perspectives over the other ones, but then you're in the position, you're sitting there, and now it's, I've got to ensure that there's balance between all four of these at all times. And that's the strategic role and that's strategic thinking. Thank you for sharing that.
I think another one that jumped out at me was the number 10, where we want to make sure we remember the human aspect of this.
Yeah.
And not get caught up in the data is the data, and it's going to inform us of how we're doing, what we're doing, but there's a whole community of people and students and teachers and administrators that rely on us, and so not to forget that part.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Ms. Barrett. So the caution, and I'm not saying with this board, with any board, like there's some business folk that are on the board, and it's like, finally, we have a scorecard. But then you have to be careful because, again, it's not making a widget or something like that, where quantitative data really rules the day. At the same time, if you don't measure something, even if it's a perception, you don't know if all you're doing is just whacking at anecdotes. Like we're making these huge multi-million-dollar decisions on anecdotal thoughts and notions instead of trying to quantify it as best we can. Look at the team trust and the good governance. We quantified, especially the team trust, we kind of quantified feelings, right? Whether it didn't matter whether they were right or wrong, it's what a trustee felt. So if I would have walked in here and said, here's the deal, if y'all give me a thumbs up that y'all trust each other, I'll leave and y'all can go home with your Chick-fil-A sandwich. And y'all would have all given me a thumbs up, but let's take it and let's quantify it. And then the second, I watched every single one of you, the second you started looking at it, wheels were turning because now you see the numbers, right? And then you see, we got to work on that. Oh, we got to work on that. And that's the point of quantifying it. But thank you. Don't get any asset carried to an extreme can and will become a liability. If you get so jazzed up on the metrics and you don't think we run a human organization here, there's a little risk on that. Great observation.
And Dr. Gibson, if I can just interject, I think the thing to remember with quantitative data, and I see this because you have so many different organizations score a school district or score a school, and one is rating it this way, one is rating it that way. So, through this process, it's really focusing in on what are the key pieces we're going to look at, because again, there's just all these organizations that love to weigh in on how school districts or schools are doing, and they're all using slightly different methodology, which confuses a lot of folks. So it's really us picking the metrics that we want to use and saying that's what this other stuff is noise, so to say, is how I look at it, because I won't say who it was, but a former superintendent will email me like, hey, this came out. And for me, it doesn't mean anything because I don't believe in the methodology that organization is using, but to them it's super important because to them it means something. Well, I'm not saying it's wrong or they're wrong or I'm right. It's just a different belief system on whether that matters or not.
And you'll solidify that way of thinking as you complete column 4 and 5, because that may fall in one of those metrics, and we've decided that that's important and that's a way we're going to look at it. But if it doesn't, it's just so much easier to ignore it because it's just, okay, they came up with a method to do it, but we didn't agree, that was one of the ways we were going to hone in on whether this success. And that's really good what you just said. And I hear a lot about community-based accountability, and I support the notion 1,000%. And I almost laugh because if you want it, this is the way to do it. Like you can, and it's just talk. But it's like, no, we've established a community. Is STAR on there? Yeah, it's right there. It's one item out of 12 items, or maybe, or it's one measure out of 15. We can't completely ignore it, but it's not everything that's on that. You said that earlier. It's one metric that we chose as a metric, for one of those items, and we've got others.
I was going to say, of those 20 questions, I like it because it aligns back to, Chapter 4 of the Ed Code, which is that access to quality education, and then it lays out the objectives in the Chapter 11, which is us, the governing piece, the oversee the management piece, and then the ensuring clearly defined results. And this allows us to tie it right back to the Ed Code, which is really kind of our statutory down to us, and then we stay strategic, ideally, and then let tactical and operational happen. So we're going to be completely aligned with what the state of Texas and the people of Texas, and then obviously our community values all say, and it's clearly right here to here to here, objectively, if we stay up here. So it is that good way to do the balance with the human aspect we always have to consider because there are dynamics to do that, but we have the guidance.
I assure you this.
It's really good.
This lines up with Lone Star Governance and name some of the others. I apologize, I'm drawing a blank, but in any of those models, and the reason I can say that, and a lot of that's based on the Ed Code, that's what made me think about it. And I don't really read a lot of it or focus on it. I know it's the right stuff, so it doesn't shock me that someone's saying, well, that's good. That lines up with Lone Star Governance or whatever. Okay, now one thing that I would say that's good about this scorecard is some of those models rightfully get you really focused on what we talked about as perspective 1 a while ago. If you just for this in this example. And it closes with, you should probably consider other aspects, i.e. the staff, finance. What I like about this is you're at the same time you're getting tight about student outcomes, you're also saying, what about staff? What about the community, our stakeholders? What about the finances? So you've got constantly have this clear line of sight on those. Because if you take perspective 2 out of here, I can get your perspective 1 numbers anywhere y'all want them to be. But all your staff may quit in 2 years with the tactics that I use to get there. But if perspective 2 is not an issue, get out of my way. Same thing. If you take perspective 1 out of there, we can have the country club and babysit, and we'll be the top workplace in San Antonio. But it's this balance between the two that we're constantly, and I could keep going with examples, but y'all get the idea. You only have a certain amount of money every year, so yeah, perspective 4 is important. Okay.
I want to mention something though on that number 10 too. It's not just the human aspect, the cultural aspect.
Correct.
That's important.
Well, it's very important in any district. It's
Yes.
acutely important in a district like Northeast.
Yes.
It's just like a divergence of so many different humans from different backgrounds.
So to also kind of use a cliche, what resonated with me out of the 22 was to make sure that we stay out of the weeds. So, and I saw several items here that, we're not the tactical, we're the strategic. We're the strategic, we're not the tactical. Don't try to bring your tactical mind here, bring your strategic mind here.
Correct.
Although your strategic mind, that might give me a headache. That's why I have a headache. But
Well, it's okay for you to be concerned about the weeds. Just ask the superintendent, how are we getting rid of the weeds? Don't pull the weeds yourself, right? Because there's somebody in charge of, just to extend that metaphor. So, and the data reports on monthly basis are to kind of let them take a look at those actions, right? That's your whole
Right.
goal.
but sometimes we can start digging and digging and digging
You
and
probably
digging
will
and digging.
on the first meeting, and y'all say it's going to be a 30-minute presentation, and 3 hours later, you're still all in the tactical role. I always like to say at SEUC, this is a day hike. Don't bring a tent. Tonight's priority report's a day hike. And definitely do not bring your RV. And I knew who had an RV on there, and I looked around. But that actually worked for us. It's a day hike. So like we're going to dabble in it. We're going to ask some questions, and I think over time, the more you'll start to see the trend lines from report to report to report, and then that'll inform a lot of your decision making. But thank you, Ms. Williams. You're right. It's about staying out of the weeds. You have the chief weed puller right there, and a bunch of staff members that are the ones that are in charge of the weeds. You're right. Let them use whatever tool they need to take care of them. Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts? I appreciate you sharing that, Ms. Williams. Okay, so dig into the 4.
So you just let me know when I can share those questions that I
Well,
had.
no, I think that would be a good setup for
Is
this.
this a good time to do it? All right.
Absolutely.
So, again, I was digging into my archives of stuff over the last 3 years. And so, as we've mulled about this, the staff and I, about how to go about it, and we've settled on a balanced scorecard, I shared with Dr. Gibson some of these questions that we were talking about when we were looking at a strategic plan. And look, this isn't going to define it, but at least maybe it'll, what I will call prime the pump, so to say, to get you thinking big. So as you're looking at defining those actions for you, or I'm sorry, the success factors, right? I want you to think about education, and not, oftentimes, we think in the today and now, but I need you all to think, think about education. What's really going to shape it in the next 10 years? What's it going to shape it in the next 20 years? Like, really don't just think about in the short term, but, what's really going to shape it in 10 years from now and in 20 years from now? Because that's when you come at this, because remember, this is about 5 years and then rebooting it for another 5 and potentially even longer. So I need you to think big like that, And then think about, ultimately, yes, we're here to educate kids, but we're to prepare them right for the next phase of life. So as a district, how can we best prepare our kids for that post when they graduate high school, for that next phase, right? And I'm not just talking about college. That's entering the military. that's entering a career, and so forth. It's all of that piece, right? So how can we best prepare them for that? What skills do our kids and our staff need to be successful? All right? And then how do we measure effectiveness beyond testing? Because, as Dr. Gibson has said many, many times, yeah, testing's there, that's there. I mean, look, it's a state requirement and we've got to do it. But there's a lot of other things as a district that we do. And so how do we measure effectiveness? And I put that to you all because how do you gauge it? And then it's going to be important to hear from our community about how do they, when you all flesh it out, do they agree with it?
I think your key word is beyond testing.
Correct. Right. I mean, look, we all know STAR matters. Like that's it's just kind of right in front of you. But past that, what other key metrics do we use to say, yeah, we're creating, we have a great, robust system here? Because STAR's just easy. It's there. The state gives it to us every year. We have it. What else? What else? All right. Do I need to repeat them, or everybody good? All right. Good deal. Thank you, Dr. Gibson.
Well, that last question you ask is perfect segue, because if tonight one of the outcomes is to start a very rough, just kind of brainstorm list, not wordsmithing. Is anybody on this board a past English teacher? Raise your hand right now. Okay. Mr. Leos, we need to talk. At the end of this process, you will serve that role, but right now it's just like keywords and phrases, So that's the question for perspective one, or bucket one, as we were saying. What are the measures that you've got a sample scorecard there that laid out for? We're not going to act like that's not sitting there. Or do any of those resonate with you? And don't like, not the way they worded it, but just the concept that they're getting at. And by the way, this was an early draft for them, just so y'all know.
Are we talking about the critical success factors?
Right. And if you want to, they call them that. But there's this is the big stuff that you would want to be a part of perspective one.
I think, and we just talked about it a minute ago, it's not just college or military, but like the trade schools. Like, do we actually, because we say CTE people, but do we need to, really push the trade school aspect? Because we have that great facility, and there's all these certifications that we're doing, and that's one of the things they're measuring, but really kind of tease it out more as a phrase to really emphasize that. Because people say career ready, tell most people, I'm not sure the average parent might know, they think college, maybe military, and not a lot of them are going to think the trade schools, yet we have all of these great things, whether it's the ag program at Madison or the other industry-based certifications we're doing. And maybe do we want to highlight that more?
Do you remember when that transition from trade to CT
Right.
happened? What year, when was that? Do you remember?
Early 2000s, probably.
There was just a shift in the name, and part of it, I think, was to encourage that it is a career, not necessarily the end, because you can have a very successful and lucrative career in any of these
How many of you
so-called
hired a
trades.
plumber last
Right.
February?
Gosh.
My best friend's dad grew up as a plumber, and he did extremely well. He ran his own business and did extremely well for himself.
Yeah.
And maybe it's the marketing piece of it, but a way we
Well, if you
tease
look,
that.
So
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I like.
Well, what I was going to say is I think that may be getting in the weeds of
Oh,
it.
it might be.
So I think
Well,
what it is like
It's
the
CCMR.
second one says,
That's exactly right.
you
right.
annually increase the percentage of students who are college and or career and are military ready. So maybe that's one of the success factors. And then when it gets to Dr. Micah and the tactical piece of it, as maybe the key strategic action is they increase what am I trying to say? Promotion.
Right.
They increase promoting. So
Yeah.
they determine the
That-
ways to help parents define it
Yeah.
and
I'll buy that,
get
yeah.
there. But I
Ms. Cronin,
think
you're exactly right, and I happen to know this because I'm working with Beeville. So if you look at 1.2, I know we said key a while ago, but if they set a CCMR strategic objective, they actually get 3 objectives in one.
Oh, okay.
Because, see, it's college and/or career and/or military ready. So on their scorecard, in the key strategic action column, the next cell to the right gets divided into 3. And then you're tracking, what do we mean for college? All the way across. What do we mean for career? All the way across. What do we mean for military? All the way across, including input measures and output measures and, inputs, outputs, outcomes, if that makes sense to your point. So really, this is laying that, Dr. Mike, it's kind of just a conversation around CCMR, like the college, the career, and the military.
Sure.
are
Now,
all
when they
important.
say annually increase, does that mean it's a graduation rate?
They're gonna have to figure all that out.
Okay.
And so it ain't gonna say
That's not
that
our
when it's
problem, I
over.
guess.
Yeah, it's not gonna say that when it's over. This was like an early phase. It was actually the meeting after this meeting.
Got it,
And they're
got it,
still
got
trying to peel it back. And what does
Got
it
it.
mean? And what does it look like? And as Mr. Bauer said earlier, at the end, they're gonna come back and say, okay, what does does the front end stuff align with what we're trying to do over here on the far right?
Right. And one thing that I'm going to put it out there when you talk about CCMR. Deb, you were with me the night I went. It was very early on in my, when I was still interim superintendent, and I met with a group, and we talked about CTE. That fell flat on its face because they do not know it as career and technical education, they being an older population. I spoke about it for probably 25 minutes, shared examples, and at the end they said, "You don't teach vocational education." And I said, I was shocked, and it took me getting one of their members to come see our career and technical center
Oh, that's right.
to teach them that this new term. So you can use CCMR. Please know I'm not trying to dissuade you, but it is going to take a lot, and I think Dr. Gibson did it great, where we all have to spend time then teaching our community about what those terms, because Miss Williams, Mr. Hilliard, both of you guys, when you came on, certain terms you didn't know what that acronym meant. Miss Williams, you did for a long time. David would like to know.
That's right.
By this, right?
Now Steve
Because
wants
we
to know.
use education is just absolutely fraught with acronyms that we know, but our community doesn't know. So I'm just using, as we use that, we like to, I call it education bingo jargon. We got to be careful that we unpack that for our community so that everybody understands, because, again, remember, 70 to 80% of our single-family homes don't have 8 children 18 years or older.
Well, and
Or,
that's-
18 years or younger. So we have to think about that community and making certain that this scorecard speaks to them equally.
Yep.
I mean, that's still happening right now. I mean, we went to you and I, Deb, we went to the Castle Hills City Hall meeting. I'm not sure. Speakers Forum. And they were, I'm not sure if he was the mayor, but.
And council person.
Council person who was leading it, he was like floored that we had culinary arts. He had no idea, right? And it's still an ongoing process. I mean, they were quite frankly like blown away of all the statistics that we shared with them. I mean, they had no clue, right? And they were very open to everything. They were pleasantly surprised by what we were offering, but but it puts us into another perspective. Like, what are we doing? Like, what are we going to be doing to get these words out? The other day I have never been in my 5 years living at Stony Hills, a neighborhood association meeting, but I did go. It was right before the new year because I figured these people need to know, like, if they have any questions or like what we're about, because they really, a lot of them don't know. And so I think that's important how we get the message out, and I think this will help.
So the objective that's being agreed upon is something, whatever terminology it winds up being, but it's not only pure academics as defined through the 4 core areas, although we'll probably have something around that, I would assume. We're a public school, but something around, I mean, really, if you take CTE, the term, all the way to the right, the outcome is probably industry-based certifications. Why are we doing all this? Industry-based certifications. Diploma in one hand, plumber's license in the other, or diesel mechanic, or whatever, and they're going to work tomorrow. Or they're going to the military and they're at a, pay grade 2, because they already have an LVN. As soon as they finish basic, so anyway, Dr. Macker, are you okay with tonight it's just concepts, right? Like this is just a concept of something related to not only.
I'm not trying to derail.
Right.
You,
I
Dr.
just wanted
Gibson.
to confirm, these big concepts and wordsmithing, you might have been in here or not. I think you were in here when I said no English teacher yet, so other than this notion around not only focusing on purely academics as one of the student strategic objectives, what else?
I think what I would like to see in here, and maybe this is it, we can fit it in here, but like the concept and the notion of fostering and creating a global citizen, just.
Were you looking at my notes?
Yes, I was. In your red pen that you use. I know that's very broad, and I know that increasing college numbers and CTE and CC fits all that, but I think seeing that is important. I'm not sure how we can fit that in, but
Well, in looking at our mission statement, we talk about responsible citizenship and, however that looks, because I even saw in here they have extracurricular and co-curricular activities as one of their items, and I think there's basically student involvement, and whether
Right.
that's in somehow getting kids involved, whether it's a knitting club or the football team or volunteer work, that it's sort of that citizenship, awareness, involvement.
And so maybe I kind of like the student involvement as maybe the,
Catalyst?
are we calling them success factors or what are we calling
Well,
these? Strategic
they're
objectives?
by most basic definition, they're strategic objectives. That's
Okay.
why I say that, because I don't want to sway you to name it something else. And don't call it strategic
Okay,
objectives.
column
That's
two.
so boring.
Can I say
but yeah,
column two?
Column 2 is great.
Column 2.
Yeah, everyone
Love it.
understands, column 2.
So column 2 may be student involvement. And then as you go past that, we help the tactical team determine, because I kind of like the student involved, because it is, you've got your kids that are athletes, you've got your kids that are in the band and the fine arts piece, but there are a lot of kids that get lost and don't have a group or a club. And so trying to get them engaged in something.
And how does it prepare the student for?
Yeah, and so
Something bigger.
so I'm going to jot down, something around student involvement. I think that's a column 2 objective. When I hear global citizen, when you said it a while ago, I was trying to just really listen. And Mr. Bauer, I think mission statement when I hear that. Just so y'all know, I just like that. That's a mission statement. It also though may typically when the tactical team starts working on strategic actions, they're keeping a clear line of sight to your mission. Mm-hmm. And they're trying, when we say global citizen, how do we teach that through extracurricular? And again, tonight, we don't know, there's going to be how many hours of conversations around this? Thousands, right? In the next 6 months. And we don't even know what beautiful nugget of gold is going to come out of any one of those 1,000 conversations. And I promise you, if you trust the process, something will come back and I'm getting chills right now. Just trust the process, be very brief here, and then let it go out and just let this gold be added to it.
But hang on, because I want to make sure that I heard you, Mr. Leos, because I do believe it's two different things that were being discussed
Yes.
here.
Yes.
It's not so much whether or not students are involved or finding a place. It's for all students, whether involved and those who have not yet found their place, feel that they are seen and heard, and the people that they come into interaction with see and hear them. and feel that they're seen and heard. So being open and aware to everyone's different beliefs, different customs, different cultures, different everything, just being global.
Yeah, and I think what you just said right now is that, you know, it is part, can you hear me? It is part of our mission statement, and so maybe that is, you know, the overall, I mean, we all come back to it, like you said, we're always, there's a direct line to that. So, like, when I think student engagement is, I think it sounds better than, like, what I'm seeing here, like, extracurricular, right? But a student engagement, like, being engaged as a student will prepare you for the mission statement. Like, it goes back to the mission statement, it goes back to being a global citizen, right? A successful citizen of the community. So maybe we don't necessarily need that there because that's what the mission statement, that's the bigger picture.
Yeah,
But-
that's the way I meant them. It's like that's like this big Uber thing.
Yeah.
That's this overarching
These-
umbrella over everything is the global citizen.
Well, and also these other points, all of them, like CCMR, CTE, all, and student engagement, all fit into that direct line to our mission statement, I think. And
Well, if I may, Ms. McLeod, I heard maybe a third thing. You said you heard two things, and then when I heard you describe them, I think I may have heard a third. So I heard a little bit from you potentially just then about student well-being also. I'm just going to
Yeah.
use that term.
It's in here.
Right, so is that something though that you all?
Yes, I
Yes.
think I
Okay.
think well-being as a, yeah.
Again, just as a real broad term right now, just student well-being. And
Yes.
one of your three initial priorities was
Yeah.
basically student and staff well-being, right? I mean, just, I'm doing that without looking at notes. Mental health, there you go. I'll capture that as well-being. So these terms are not the ultimate terms. These are just our operational terms for tonight, something related to CCMR in the sense that it's more than just, you know, the traditional, like what the especially career emphasis. I'm going to make a note on the global citizen, maybe that stays in the mission as an overarching, but we got to always look at that as we're looking at these others. So then we're going to pick up student involvement and engagement in some form or capacity. That's a big rock. And then student well-being.
So is student voice with student involvement engagement?
Yeah,
Or
there's
is that branch off?
two, in my
That's the
mind, when I
branch off.
hear
Okay.
that, well, and it can fit in two places. If in perspective 3, you go to like the stakeholder aspect and you say taxpayers, non-taxpayers, parents, students, you know, or let's just say their customers, and you can pick it up there. Also, Ms. Winkley, if you go with stakeholders, though, you're probably, if it has to do with a student voice, you're probably going to park it in perspective 1. It's going to be somewhere in perspective 1. It could wind up being student well-being and student voice.
Question
That could wind up being the objective.
1.1 on this one, just as every student grows every year. Obviously, I think that's the academic piece we've kind of covered, but do we need to, obviously, our primary thing is improved student academic performance. Do we need to clearly articulate the academic piece? Because there can be student growth in lots of other areas with the extracurriculars and involvements. So do we, as a board, need to clearly state, obviously, the academic piece? And there's different ways to measure beyond just the testing piece, those other things that the staff, do we need to clearly state that, though?
I mean, my
I think we
opinion
do.
is you do.
I think
That's
so.
I think
that's
we do
almost
too.
what the community expects, like
Yeah.
growth in the 4 core areas.
I
you know,
think that's
that-
bad, just if we need to put the word academic growth or something like that as the thing, because you said student achievement. Just a thought.
So I don't, Dr. Micah, is just academic growth for right now in core areas, is a good way to capture that? Just to keep it real broad, Ms. Cronin?
I mean,
I mean, again, tonight, you're dipping your toe in this, right? Hopefully, at the end, Dr. Gibson will kind of take this, synthesize it for us, so I can push it back out to you all to spend some time with it, then reflecting over the next few weeks, so that when we come back on the 20th, you can really say, you know what, I've thought about this, I like these pieces, or hey, you know what, as I thought about it more, I kind of think we should do it this way, so that's when you solidify your thinking as a group. Tonight's really about trying to get some key areas,
Yeah,
right?
and I've got 4, go ahead, Ms. Cronin.
Well,
Key means 3, by the way. That's what I was about to say.
That's where
I've
I'm
got
going.
4. Okay.
We have
Yeah.
4 on, so,
It's hard with the student one. I think you'll find it easier in the other 3 perspectives to hit 3.
but, so can we maybe combine some language so that we only have 3?
You could, I mean, in glancing, student involvement, engagement, and well-being, those seem to be able, you had well-being if you roll well-being as a component of engagement, I don't know, it just depends on, I would almost say leave them apart right now and don't worry about the 4.
Okay.
Because I felt some energy around the well-being.
And I'm sure we'll get community input and staff input. We'll
That's
figure
right.
out what it looks right as we think about it
That's
over the
right.
coming weeks
Okay.
to see what makes the most sense.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And I appreciate you listening and hearing me earlier say key means 3, but in this. Yeah.
Did.
In this case, though, those 4 make sense.
Sometimes we overachieve.
Yeah, I know.
We hit our goal and we
I
exceed it.
got it. You hit it early. Okay, so then with regards to what, we typically have as perspective 2, which is something around staff. Right now, we're globally keeping it
Staff.
student, staff, stakeholders, and I have financial stewardship on the last one. I want to check on that one before we leave, because that's almost like the role of the district. Stewardship I like because it lends itself to these are not our dollars, they're the taxpayers' dollars, but they're in our hand, and we are the stewards of these resources. So I want to make a case for that at the end, but I won't right now. So in staff, what are the big thoughts? And Ms. Winkley, you can't go first. But what are the big? But what? But you can. Yeah.
She may come up
it's
with
your
5. Be
passion
careful.
it's your passion that I'm calling out, Ms. Winkley. That's all I'm doing. Actually, you can go first. But when you think about staff, what are the 3 biggest objectives that are out there?
Well, I think retention and recruitment is a big one.
Yep. And that actually can be one.
Yeah.
It's a lot of the same actions that are recruitment and retention, okay?
And so I think Ms. Winkley's engagement piece could be the tactical piece to recruitment and retention.
It absolutely could.
But I actually think that engagement and satisfaction leads to retention.
So really,
If you have engagement and satisfaction, your people will not leave.
right.
Yeah.
They are vested. They want to
You value them. You recruit them, you value, and then you retain them because they know that they're vested in. I would say number 4 or number 1 kind of go. You can tie the recruitment, retention, but also the compensation, which we know
Yeah.
Dr. Mike and the staff spend a lot of time on. But if we were trying to get down to 3,
Yeah, I've got like a
Yeah, I don't
map
think
trying
4
to
needs to
tie
be on there.
them
Yeah.
together.
Yeah,
Because
I
I
think-
think 4 goes under 1.
Well,
I would
you
agree
just
that-
remember, that's right, and to the right, over in, I bet that one on this one gets moved over to a key strategic
Yeah.
action. And it will probably not say competitive compensation, well, actually, it probably will, like insurance of
Right.
an analysis of competitive compensation. That's
Yeah.
gonna be the key
Yeah,
strategic
but
action.
to me, that's a tactical.
That's a
thing.
tactical.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good point. So, and this is another thought, if the board is only adopting column 1 and column 2, you're gonna have some document somewhere that's not going to have column 3, 4, and 5. Do you see what I'm saying? Like that's like the base version. So you almost have to think, what are the 3 most important concepts that need to appear on that version? So it gets kind of tough, Ms. Winkley, thinking this way, because then, like, do we want it to say satisfaction engagement? Do we want it to say recruitment and attention? Are those the same things? Will that be fleshed out in the strategic actions? What are the most important words that need to appear on that base version?
I've circled and scratched, and I'm working on it.
And for 2.2, and it goes back to a comment Dr. Mike was making, but it says continuous development training staff, but I think it needs to be more focused or the right type of training, not just the latest, whatever it is, that we're doing the right training for the right reasons, tied back to these
Intentional?
goals. Yeah, not just necessarily, I mean, there is a continuous process too, but it's focused or the right development of the training.
So the broadest term, which that's kind of why I'm here tonight, is capacity building. That's the broadest term. So at all levels of all staff, are you building their capacity to perform the job that they've been hired to do? And I'm not saying that that's what you need to put on here. I'm just kind of giving you that as a working
I
definition.
think that yeah, that's a good direction to go, because in thinking through some of the questions Dr. Micah came up with, what are we, let's not just say, let's go to the latest training, because that's what everybody else is doing. Are we giving staff the tools to grow into the future, looking 10 years, 20 years ahead, and think, this is where we need to be placing people?
Yeah, and that, again.
And I think,
The final word probably will not wind up being capacity building.
right,
But to capture the nugget tonight, that kind of is the big, and the key is, and this is really important, and I've never heard this from you all, and I want to point it out, and I think it's a good thing. I haven't heard you only say teachers. Almost every time you say staff.
Oh, all of them.
Well, you would be
right.
shocked at the number of districts that's just teacher, 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 and I'm not minimizing that. It's a half of your workforce, I get it. But that's 50% of your workforce. What about the other 50% of your workforce? So I love that we're using this term staff to mean all staff members. So is capacity building okay for now, like as the rock to hold the position?
That's one of the three.
That's one of
Yeah.
the three is capacity building.
Okay.
because I agree with Steve. I think the idea of training makes it sound like we're just doing this training.
Versus them
Like
learning
right
and then
now.
they grow, because then they aspire
Yeah.
both in and out of the
And
classroom
I'm
depending on
not-
what their role
yeah,
is. It's
and to me, that is
aspirational.
more of a column 3 versus
Right.
column 2.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's my
It's
opinion.
part of that.
It's that development piece? The answer to development? Is that what
The
you're
training.
saying?
I'm just saying that to me seems more,
She's saying the tactical team
Tactical.
will outline more of that intentionality under the key strategic actions, if the direction is for
Got it.
capacity building.
Got
They're gonna get intentional about it. And I promise you, and Mr. Hilliard, I feel comfortable with saying that, because when you start moving these things to the right, you've gotta get granular. And so what does that mean? And I could almost guarantee it's going to be about intentional. We're not just gonna train to train. Now we're asking, what do you need to do your job? What are the tools and resources you need to do your job? I mean, that's a typical
Dr. Mike
question.
has said
Right,
that before.
right, but I like what you said, Mr. Hilliard, about they have aspirations to move up as well.
Yeah.
So now we're not only training them to do the current job, but also to
that's
move
It's
up
the
within
long
the
term, it's
organization.
aspirational,
Yeah,
and then they're
that's
gonna
great.
improve those around them
That's
ideally,
great.
the organization writ large.
There's a term that escapes me for that, but near senior moment.
near senior moment. I love that.
What about like staff well-being? I mean, it says right here, like, staff engagement and satisfaction, but well-being. We
It's
use
one
that
of Dr.
term.
Micah's pillars.
I think, yeah,
Oh yeah,
I think staff well-being should be a big rock.
I think so too.
Or now are we at 4? Okay, so let's
Well, does that fall under staff engagement, though, and staff well-being? I mean, can they be
it could be.
put together
I
possibly?
think so.
Right, but correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Gibson. If they get to 4 in each one, that doesn't mean, other than you're gonna take some time and maybe look at how they can condense into.
The
think
assignment was
that's right.
3.
Right.
Well,
I
The
know.
assignment was 3.
I know, but we talked about this,
Yeah,
that
for-
sometimes what happens is you get a lot, and then when you really start spending time with it, you start to see, yeah, this really fits in. And again, what you're having this discussion, see, this is that piece that as you're talking, you're helping me understand what you mean by these words.
That's right.
And that helps me explain to the staff what you mean by those words, helps Deb communicate that to our community, what these words mean. So I guess don't get too fixated on the 3 tonight, because you can condense them when we come back.
Right. and
Can
that-
you tell me what we have written, though? Because I
Yes,
guess
you-
I'm,
Wait, could you add maybe staff engagement and well-being, because satisfaction is engagement is satisfaction. If you're disengaged, if you're not engaged, you're dissatisfied. So I think that it's one and the same. So, and when Mr. Leo said well-being, we could do engagement and well-being.
see, I
Yeah.
was thinking it could just be well-being, and then the engagement could fall under that piece. But what are our 4?
So the 4 that I have right now are satisfaction, engagement. And I'm not, before you said what you just said, Ms. Winkley, but so the satisfaction, engagement, recruitment and retention, capacity building, and staff well-being. That's kind of the 4 that have been, now here, you want to extend that conversation, so that's the 4 that I had written down.
I think
I
that you
think-
could get rid of staff well-being and scratch out satisfaction, and it could be staff engagement and well-being.
Everybody good with that?
Except I'd say staff.
Well, I'd say it's a good starting point, because
and
as you said, there's gonna be 1,000 hours of conversation,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get staff input, and we'll get
Yeah.
community input, parent, everyone will
Yeah,
kind of
but
say,
I
yeah,
think
how are we
that's a
doing it?
good-
So it may, we'll figure out what it looks like,
But
but at
that
least,
gets us to 3, right?
Yeah,
3
that is
rocks.
3, that's
Okay.
correct. And one thing, and I'll emphasize that, the reason I said try to stick with 3 is we said key, and it was to try to keep you from getting to 10. So, I mean, so I was trying to set a marker, so don't worry about it, as Dr. Micah said. The way you probe this in the future is when the tactical team goes to work on it, if the strategic actions are exactly the same in 2 of them, they can be combined. Right, because it's like they're saying, well, the work we're doing that gets us to that is this work, and if it's just ditto, then it's the same thing. So likewise, they may go to work and do the opposite of that. We went to work on this, that has to be bifurcated because it turns out that's different work. But they'll give the rationale back to the board of why that has to be bifurcated and be 4 of them instead of 3 of them, maybe. But the way we're going about this is perfect, I think, to say, here's kind of the nugget and the essence, the gestalt, I think is the word, of what we want to be a part of perspective 2. So recruitment and retention, capacity building, staff engagement, and well-being. 3 big rocks. All right? So with stakeholders, not to be confused with shareholders, as we previously discussed. This is going to be a little bit different conversation. Because you may have more than 3 categories of stakeholders that you can think of. And once you list one of them, you may think you need to list all 5 of them.
well, I mean, I would say, obviously, we have the parents, then we
Yeah.
also have the taxpayers or the other part of the community that are definitely, like you say, 75% of them don't have kids in school, but have a vested interest in the students that graduate that are prepared to be responsible citizens and do that piece of it. And one other conversation we may want to consider in this, there's lots of families that have decided to go charter, private, whatever, but have we looked at maybe also figuring out why they left so that we can maybe figure out where other things we can do in our strategic plan to show them why we're a great option and why they should come back to in the scorecard.
Yeah.
That may not be for this particular scorecard, but that's a thought I had about, we're trying to do some real solid things that are going to show the commitment here from the board across the district, that we can get some of those people also to
Yeah,
reconsider.
so
But
if you
that's-
look at the example 3.2, I would almost guarantee that if you're trying to get at engagement, then you're going to study disengagement
Yeah.
as part of that. Because if I'm trying to work on engagement, I need to know why they're disengaged. Well,
See, and again, I think that piece is.
tactical.
That's it. That's down a couple levels where they figure out the pieces
they-
to come back to
right.
us and
So-
say, here's how
So
we're
I
looking.
think
The family engagement.
I kind of like the 3 that there are, student, family, because I think community could address your business community.
Well, and they
your
can bifurcate
that
that
don't
again
have-
to the right. They can split that between community, business, taxpayer,
Yeah.
whatever's logical.
Yeah.
And then I think family kind of covers everybody who, I don't know.
Let's just face
kinda like
it, the
those.
term parent is
I'll
different.
say that
Today,
I like
right?
family.
family.
'Cause, like, I would almost say if you're going to ever use the word parent, say parent and family, or just say family. Today,
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's more logical.
So does community just limit itself to those households without children, or is it businesses as well?
Well, so,
That's what we were just saying.
yeah, it's kind of tomato, or chicken or
I'm
egg
sorry, I
here.
was
So,
reading.
no,
Potato,
I know you were. I was watching you read because you do this when you don't want me to talk and you're trying to read, and you were studying it very closely. So so Miss Winkley.
Right?
What?
You're keeping score over there, aren't you, Mr.
Yeah,
Leo?
that's right. So I owe you like 6. The problem is we know the same people too well.
Just
And I'm
wait.
trying to live up to his
You're
reputation.
doing very well.
Okay, all right, good. Let him know.
I will.
So the tactical team could split the key strategic action into whatever buckets they think
Okay.
means community. And
They
then
can
now
do
you've
business
got-
community versus
Right.
other
Yeah,
community, and
okay.
So
then come
now
up
they're
with some,
doing a strand of actions and measures that are different for
Got it.
each one of those.
and let them worry about the specific pieces. And then
Right,
look at the
but the
long term.
broadest term. Now, on the flip side of that, it may come, the board may decide, thinking about the board approval document, like, do you want some of those words that the staff comes up with to appear in that board approval document? But you can have that conversation later.
And do we, at some point, depending on what words we go with, have a definition of terms, if there's any of these broader terms, so that we define it clearly for all the stakeholders? So when we say community, they know we're talking specific community or whatever we decide.
And I think, Mr. Hill, you're hitting exactly what I was alluding to earlier. As we go around listening, they're helping us define those terms.
Yeah.
So that because oftentimes we'll use a word that we think everybody has that definition of, but we find out, what a lot of other people define it differently. So this will help you all. We'll gather this information from the community and be able to come back to you and say, when we said the word, community, here's what it resonated with them. This is what it sounds. When they hear community, here's what they make that sound like. And, I'm just going to make something up, but, they don't ever mention business. So is that the best word for us to use, or should we use something different? Because it didn't resonate out in our community to incorporate
That's great.
business.
Yeah, that's really good.
And,
That's a good way to test it.
right, like, we're going to hear from them exactly when they hear these terms, what do they think of? And that will help you all make a good decision on what words to use.
So, I know what I think of when I hear this, but when we say engagement and stakeholder engagement and satisfaction, and then we further defined the different engagement groups, as opposed to say, instead of saying stakeholder engagement satisfaction, stakeholder relations or relationship. And then what we mean by that is how well they engage, I guess, and how
Right, it could be a
satisfying.
broader term, and then
Yeah.
as you move to the right on it, it's you're talking about satisfaction and engagement, and you're measuring those separately. I probably said this before, but satisfaction is by definition closer to happiness. Engagement, by definition, you almost have to be satisfied to be engaged. But engagement is, I love the Ken Blanchard, raving fan. So, like, would a community member advocate for Northeast ISD somewhere at a family reunion in Louisiana when no one cares? Right, or at the grocery store, at church, in another town? Would they? So they're engaged, so they've gone beyond just being happy with it. Like, they're actively saying, I work at the best place, or my kids go to the best school. So that's the difference between satisfaction and engagement. By
So, I'm thinking, well, maybe I don't have time or I want to be engaged, but I have a good relationship and I'm okay with what the district is doing. I see that more of a maybe relationship or ambassador or.
So you're
Yeah.
thinking of engagement as actually being involved? Or is that
Yeah.
what I'm
Yeah.
thinking? Okay. So you're saying, okay, I'm a parent and I'm engaged because I'm active with PTA or I'm active.
That's what I'm thinking.
Well,
Do we
and
mean
I-
something differently?
No, I should have clarified. That is a good measure of engagement also. If you were going to measure engagement, if I was going to create a survey to do that, I would ask them questions. Do you do things that you don't have to do, on behalf of your kid? And then do you advocate or support your school in a non-school environment? Like, do you talk? It would be both of those things. So sorry, Ms. Williams. It would be what Ms. Grona said also. Like, how involved are you in the stuff that happens after hours?
But what if I'm not involved? How do you measure? I mean,
Well, that's why we ask the
that
other
doesn't mean I'm not
questions.
happy.
Right, but we ask the other questions. If we can't measure it in your involvement because you're too busy, it's, would you advocate for us in a non-educational, like a non-school environment? Would you speak highly of us?
So
Well,
that would say I'm satisfied, I guess?
that it would say that you're satisfied to the point of engagement. It's a higher, engagement is a higher level of satisfied. You can't be engaged without satisfaction. You can be satisfied without engagement.
Okay.
So
one
engagement
way to-
doesn't necessarily, I'm sorry to interrupt.
That's
Nope.
okay.
What I'm hearing you say is engagement isn't necessarily being involved. Engagement may just be me going and talking to friends in another district and saying, God, I love the school that my kids
That's
go to
correct.
because.
Both of those are signs of engagement.
Right, so it's
My-
not just being involved, it's promoting.
Right, promotion is a good way to say it. That's Ken Blanchard raving fan.
And-
Like we've created a raving fan, not just a fan, but a raving fan.
And this may tie kind of back up into our values or what were our old board goals, because I was kind of playing with different ones looking around, and, NAISD will foster an environment of relationships, transparency, engagement with all stakeholders to encourage their participation in the educational work of the NAISD community. That's more of like a value or belief that we have, how we're going to do it, and then get down to the satisfaction we can measure differently. But what we want from them for that engagement and relationship piece, which may not be, like you say, direct involvement, but they're still happy and engaged on behalf of the district. in those
So
ways.
maybe we need to, maybe the three rocks need to be student, family, and community, and then we need to figure out the best terminology to support those rocks.
Well, and I agree, and relationships may be it for the base version. Student relationships,
Yes.
community relationships, parent relationships, and then let you all go, what does
See
that
what
mean?
Comes back.
Let
what?
tactical team
Let
go
the
first.
tactical team say, what does that mean when we're saying? I heard you earlier.
I kind of
you-
see that as we're
yeah,
keeping it at the strategic level.
yes.
And then the tactical team can determine, yeah.
And we'll have a better definition of terms of what it does mean, and then we can tweak from there as we see appropriate.
And again, I think column one, right now, we just have, it says students, staff, stakeholder, am I correct?
Correct.
So it doesn't say stakeholder engagement and satisfaction. For our column one, this is just the sample. I think our column one right now just has the word stakeholder.
Correct.
And then our big
And then-
rock can be those three things, and then,
Relationships, and then we'll see what that means as they do their listening tour. I
And that-
think that's a great point. That's
That
what-
kind of clears up some stuff for me, because I was reading this, increased student engagement and satisfaction, and how is that different than what's up there already that we have? But if we're saying we're talking about relationships, that seems different to me. And then we'll let it'll define itself as we move more. But
to the next column.
Yeah, if you were doing the business version of a balanced scorecard, you may have a fifth perspective. I'm sorry, that perspective may just say customer. And that makes sense, right? Because it's for profit. So I think you should look at this, even though it's a nonprofit. You almost have to ask yourself, and I'm sure Dr. Micah and the tactical team I know they're thinking this way, so this will be part of their mindset. Are students customers in today's public education environment? Are parents customers? Well, they sure are taking other options, right? And by the way, I work in a lot of small schools, and you'd be surprised that you drop a portable building on Main Street behind the Methodist Church, put in for a charter, and a district that has 500 students all of a sudden has 50 kids gone, which is devastating to a 500 student district. That 50 kids just. So it's not negative about that. That's not my point tonight. It's just were those 50 people customers that went there? So I know y'all will be looking at it through a customer lens, whatever that means.
Yeah, and I'm just looking at chapter 4. That code number 2 is students are the number 2 right after parents. Students will be encouraged and challenged to meet their full educational potential. So how do we do that and quantify that engagement piece? And it ties right back into that higher strategic level with the law, but they are seen as one of the primary, obviously, recipients through the education system, of course. and that stuff, but how do we quantify it and track it with
So
that
we'll
stakeholder
leave
engagement?
it for the broad term as stakeholders on the perspective, and then student relationships, family relationships, community relationships to get the balls rolling, to get this thing kick-started. That's the big broad term. Now, the thing usually goes off the tracks on perspective 4, so you have been warned. So, and I don't,
Can we stop now?
yeah, you can stop now and feel very successful. I don't want you to be frustrated, seriously, if like there's some cognitive dissonance about 4. One of the reasons is, we get a first report, you get an audit, you get this, you get that, and isn't that enough? Why do we, so if you notice on the sample, one of them, which Deb, in her background, will appreciate 4.3, they're articulating that we need to communicate better our efficiency and so it's about this communication of financial stewardship. Like they're saying that's got to be one of our big rocks. But do you see how different these are? Now, this is a potentially growing district also, so you see they're 4.5, and then they've got some trustees that think, well, if we don't build schools, they won't move here. So let's don't build schools. Let's stay 4A. I'm serious. And so they don't realize that the developments are already approved and they're coming, to that particular, okay. So that's why they have 4.5. So I don't want you to get frustrated if we get a little bogged down on 4, but maybe the best way to say is, what do you see in perspective 4 there that resonates with Northeast ISD?
Well, I have a question. Therefore is operations and financial stewardship. And our thing was just finance.
Yeah, I think that's okay for now. There's some reasons why the operational stuff is in there. They have a lot of efficiencies they need to try to achieve, a lot.
I saw one district that broke out the finances from the operations, the maintenance of facilities but there is such an overlap that, if we find a smart way to do it, it would keep us to the 4 and then down to the 3 possibly, but because there is so much that goes into maintenance facilities and all those pieces of it that eats up, I'm pretty sure a pretty big part of our budget, beyond obviously the staff piece, is the facility maintenance and those operational pieces, but.
Well, I guess the reason I bring that up is because I wasn't thinking about the 4.4, the safety and security planning. When I was thinking about the finance piece of it, that wasn't in my brain.
Well, they almost embedded that in student well-being. And then after like an hour-long debate, they said, no, it needs to appear in our column 2.
Or
But I think
But
too,
there was some reasons for that. I just want
Yeah.
y'all to know that there was.
I think as a reminder, this is going to be extremely, the financial piece, I think, is going to be, of all the pieces, so much more different than ours because we're different size districts and in different phases
Correct.
of growth. And so
Correct.
I almost feel like we need to not look at them
And just
and just come up with our
3
own,
rocks.
except for the communication of financial stewardship. Because I truly believe, and I don't even believe we need anything but financial in perspective, because once we communicate that financial stewardship, the responsibility that we have and have always had, then those questions are answered in the tactical part of it. Does that make sense? Did I
Yes,
say
it
that?
does. So but you're saying you think the communication is important and should be one of the,
I do. And
so is there
I-
agreement to that?
Although,
as
wait
one
a
of-
second.
Okay.
Here's something to throw out there. Does that come into stakeholder relationship?
Maybe.
Yeah. So I take it off.
And we have to communicate all of this, that's gonna be a part of the engagement process across all
Yep.
the priorities, so, but a better job of articulating how we, save money by
How
redoing the bonds and all
financially
that.
responsible
And
we
that,
are.
because I wrote down,
Fiscally
the
responsible.
responsible stewardship of the taxpayer fund and community resources through good governance and best practices, but that's a lot of more of kind of like a value or vision piece, but,
To quote David Byer, does this affect our budget in any capacity?
Is that
yeah,
me?
it is responsible stewardship of the money, taxpayer money, but also the resources,
Yeah.
all those buildings, because how much of our buildings are worth, and they're a community resource, because like one of our goals was community access, but that's an important piece too, is that we maintain them, and the preventive maintenance or putting on new chillers like we're doing after this, those type of things, It gets to be a little bit wordy though, but distill it down possibly. And then-
So are we saying remove 4.3 and eliminate 4.4?
I think we're not looking at their.
Yeah, I
Trying to
I'd
stay
think
out
it's
of
a-
We're
there.
just coming, okay.
But
Come
if
in
there's
there.
some items in there that resonate, use them, but I don't think
Yeah.
we're
Sure.
gonna go directly from the language on the sample.
4.1 makes sense, sorry, Mr.
That's right.
It makes sense in a general thing. We may want to use different words, but obviously it is, we have a process, we're already doing this, but that clearly it's a focus of the board because one of our things is ensuring financial viability. But how do we want to word that and express it to the community?
There's a really good chance that you already do all 5 of these, so these are not going to be stretch things. Probably the reason this is included in the balanced scorecard is that if you take the step after implementation and go to deployment of it, you're gonna have monthly, or, I mean, you're gonna have a monthly priority report on a different priority each month. That's what most districts do. So that means in the cycle of 8 months, you get through 4 priorities, one, like September priority 1, October priority 2, November priority 3, December priority 4, January priority 1, February priority 2, 3, 4. You see? So you're hearing a priority 4 report in December and in April. Now, the April one makes sense, right? Or are y'all July 1 or, yeah. So it actually would be a little bit earlier than that. But so you might modify that on a July 1. But the point is, not just at budget time are we hearing a budget report. Because we've had a scorecard report where 4 or 5 months ago, we kind of teed up the big issues coming in the upcoming, year or whatever. That's kind of the operational help with this. So maybe, and Ms. Winkley, you're right. Maybe don't look at this for a second and back up and think, what are we supposed to do with the dollars? And then if we're going to communicate it 2 or 3 times a year, what do we want to communicate?
So one of the things that was kind of floating in my head that I not completely well thought out, but thrown out there is thinking of the charge of think big and how do we measure things beyond tests, and then combining that with some like facilities in the like how do you look to the future through physical things like facilities that would tie back to the
Yeah.
budget and that type of thing, and how I'm not sure how
Robust
to.
future planning.
Yeah.
Is what
That's
some-
the comprehensive, the long-term, because the
Yeah.
bond, and so that we are being targeted with where we're going to put the bond money. We know the 5-year plan is this. We have to replace middle school, high school, elementary school, X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But we're looking at it over the 3 and 5 and 7 year. So it's the planned dollars that we know of the preventive maintenance and then any new facilities that may.
Well, and
And
it's
again,
looking
you're
to-
probably already doing that. What this then becomes is your tool for communicating what we're doing. That's,
So the community knows what's coming up. Hey, we have to redo X elementary school or.
Well, and even
bonds.
the ICSI and things like that. What are we looking at 20 years down the road that manifests itself in facilities or
Sure, but
those types of
but think about new programs like that
Or
as
new
in student
programs.
involvement. Because see,
That's true.
that program created a niche for a bunch of kids that didn't have one. Do you see? And it also hit upon career readiness, potentially military readiness. So see, it kind of fits in some other pieces there. I liked what Mr. Hilliard was talking. Okay, first off, I think you're exactly. Look, I think these key pieces here, I'm not sure personally, my opinion, don't really hit for us. But I liked what Mr. Hilliard talked about, which was facilities, making sure that we're maintaining our facilities in a manner that's fiscally responsible, right? Because I don't know if you all have ever gone to the East Coast, but I spent some time in Boston. Their buildings are 100 years old, folks. I mean, they just don't, they're old, and there's a lot of, as buildings age and you don't keep them up to date, putting in new LED lights and updating chillers and things, they become super inefficient. So, if that's one of those pieces about maintaining financial stewardship, yeah, you want to make sure that your buildings are up to date and maintained in a manner that actually saves you money. They're not costing you more. because you can delay, I'll use Mr. Hilliard's piece of a chiller, you could maybe limp a chiller along X amount of years, but in doing so, you actually spent more money in trying to limp it through than just replacing it from the get-go. Does that make sense?
Yes, it happens all the time in aviation. So the older planes get more expensive to maintain, and so
Right.
at some point it becomes cost prohibitive to continue to maintain them. It's more expensive to keep them than to buy
Correct.
new, replace of the long-term cost.
Which I've told you all about, our white fleet, our aging white fleet, right? And that's why, as we're looking, we're not just simply looking at age anymore. It's just at what point this just doesn't, it's not cost effective anymore. That's the one you remove from the fleet. And then you replace it with a different one.
And it allows us to budget 3 and 5 years out, because every year you're going to replace X number of vehicles.
correct.
Whatever they need to be on
So,
site.
so
Correct.
is it a financial assessment of our asset?
Well, yeah, I heard that in there, Ms. Winkley, and then I heard efficiency and effectiveness. I heard that in there, and then I heard what you just
Facilities,
said, but
yeah.
facility, but not just like additional needs, but maintenance of existing needs. So that was almost like 4 things I heard in that very good, robust conversation just then. Does efficiency and effectiveness need to appear as an objective? Let me just, do you need to clearly say, these are efficiencies that we're working on and trying to achieve? Is that something that just needs, you're probably doing it again, but are we intentional about communicating that we do it?
I don't know that we're intentional.
Well, can we write it down for now, and
Yeah.
then,
And if you
we think about it?
I
Play it
think
out.
that's good as a placeholder, but so if you're going to say efficiency, I think it's always prudent to add effectiveness to it, because you can always do something cheaper.
Okay.
So you say effectiveness and efficiency. You just need to, I know it's a
One
word
or the
game,
other.
but it's really important, because again, we can always do something cheaper, and it breaks in a year,
Or, we can save money in air conditioning. We can just turn off the air immediately when school ends.
But we gotta think about people.
But see,
Perspective two,
that's what I'm
perspective
saying
two,
though, is that to Greg's point, to Dr. Gibson's point, is that that's efficient, but that's not super effective, and it's not definitely taking care of people, right?
Yeah.
So I think to his point, you have to kind of have them both, because if you just focus on efficiency, and you've seen this in organizations, they just try to keep saving money, and they're losing market share because people are they're like, that's just not the product I want anymore.
So Dr. Micah and everyone, when Dr. Micah first started, and he's done this the past 3 years, I think it was more so at the beginning as there was some shuffling maybe of positions and reassigning where, the evaluation of budgets and line items that were being purchased in certain departments, and recognizing that really was not maybe a wise part. But you've saved a lot of money for the district in that aspect, for taxpayers, for all of us who live in the district. And so is there a component to that? Like, I know that you do it. I know that whenever there is a change, you go through and you evaluate. But is there a component to that where, maybe we haven't assessed certain departments, certain budgets, because it just wasn't maybe in the rotation of the audit? Or are we being
Sure.
responsible in that aspect?
Yeah, I remember Mr. Hilliard asked me that one night, and I can't say, but it was like, what's the next worry area, right?
Right, yeah, the long term.
See, that's that piece. So I think to Dr. Gibson's point, this is about making sure we stay focused. And again, maybe the piece is one of the 3 is just effective and efficient operations.
Yeah.
And that's such a broad piece that allows us
Yeah.
to look at the efficiency of staffing,
Is that-
the efficiency
And
of
not just
buildings.
assets, but all.
But Dr. Gibson's, is that kind of?
Yeah, I think
mean,
that's
to
as
me,
a
it's
starting point,
like
I think.
there it kind of is, and then we kind of flesh out then from listening to community and piece, what do they expect from that effective and efficient piece? And then we flesh it out in that 3rd column, which is this is what it's
And
focused
it ties
on.
back to our oversight of the management of the district, which is exactly what we'd be doing, and we can
Correct.
communicate what Ms. Cindy out to the community, how we're that continuous process improvement over the long term, the strategic. It's not just this year, we're gonna do this year after year in
Right.
different areas as needed by you and the staff
Correct.
to continually improve and save money.
Because
And
part,
with-
and just, I mean, part of the column 3 just may be an efficiency audit,
Yeah.
looking at buildings. And that could be I mean, that could be, I'm talking off the cuff, right? But, you know, could be what's the, drawing a blank, TASB does it, a study for staffing.
It's a comprehensive, staffing.
Comprehensive
Yeah, it's a
staffing study.
That's right.
That just looking at efficiency in there. So there's lots of ways then that we can attack it if that's something that we want to look at. Because, look, personally, I think that's a good way to phrase it because, as I've talked about with salaries and things, right, we've just kind of peaked out at our what we can get in tax revenue. So when you start looking at efficiencies, now you can start looking at, hey, that's not a real good way to be doing it because we are doing it, Miss Winkley, in situations. This creates a more systemic, to Mr. Hilliard's piece. It's a systemic piece that this is always ongoing. If a staff moves on, because, you know, we're going to bring you an idea here soon, looking at that exact piece. This is a more efficient way, saves us a little money, and this is what it does. And so when we're making those decisions, I can ground it in this document. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I have two objectives, one around future planning and facility management, like whatever that means, comprehensive, whatever that means, we'll flesh that out, and then effective and efficient operations. So one's really looking more specifically, I think, at facility, and then one's just this broad. It could be facility, it could be staff, it could be the budget, or whatever, depending on where it goes to the tactical team. So those are two big objectives.
Well, I would just say, just as long as the community or whomever we might share this with understands that we are including financial stewardship.
So, tell me a little bit more, Ms. Williams.
Well, I mean, when we're saying future planning and facility management, and then we're saying effective and efficient operations, I don't know if the regular Joe off the street is going to understand that,
Gotcha.
you know,
we
we're
haven't
including finances.
They want to see the word budget.
People want to see, they want
Yeah.
to see budget or
Right.
stewardship or something that
Right.
knows.
You know, in my mind, if you have to do too much explaining, then the message isn't clear.
Right, and I don't mean this to be flippant at all. There will be a lot more engagement, my prediction, with your community thinking around the other three than around this fourth one. And that's okay. I want to just say that. Because that's okay. Because it's almost like they don't know what they don't know. And then but just don't ignore perspective for, like, build it over time. And the more you talk about it, the more people understand it, the more involvement you'll
Sure.
get.
Dr. Gibson, I will say, though, that it'll be interesting to test your theory since 70 to 80% of our single-family
Yeah,
homes
that's a good
don't
point.
Don't
have
have-
kids.
That's a fair
Right.
point.
See,
Yeah.
that's
Fair
where I
point, yeah.
think that component, it's why I hired Deb, it is to communicate with
Yeah.
this very large contingent that don't understand.
Fair point.
Because they are taxpayers. They are people that are extremely important in our community that need to understand, because when they get their tax bill, while they don't realize we don't create that increase, that's the largest portion on their tax bill.
So with
and
that-
so they need to understand
So
that piece.
Okay, this would be redundancy in light of what you just said, and you just helped me connect the dot with Ms. Williams, so thank you, Dr. Micah. But is there a communication piece? And just be purposefully redundant. Communication's going to happen just because you're using a scorecard.
Financial stewardship communication.
Do you need to say communication of financial stewardship like that? That's a target for us. We want, not only are we gonna do this, but we're gonna make sure we're constantly communicating and being transparent.
Oh, I mean, yes, we need to do that, but I don't think in this section it needs to say communication of. It just needs to have the word finance somewhere or budget.
Yeah, and you've got that. I mean,
Financial stewardship is good. I mean, whatever financial, but whatever words we want to
So,
use.
right now, we just have two rocks, right?
Right, one's facility and then one is effective and, well, facility bifurcated between potential future and management of existing, thank you, Deb, and then effective and efficient operations.
So why don't
Effective-
we just make another rock that says something about budget or financial stewardship or something, just, and then again, I mean, we're gonna massage this and think about all this, so maybe we just make that a rock. And then,
And get feedback and play with budget and financial stewardship and start with there and then see what we get back? Or is that
Yeah,
too big?
What about budget
But
development?
remember, you're going to come back on the 20th, or on the 20th of this month and kind of review all of this
This
again
one-
and massage it. So
Yeah.
you're going to get another touch point, and even then you may say, we need another touch point. So we'll create another touch point, right, before we go to the community. So you still have time to
I'm-
play with this. This is the process, right?
I'm going to, in light of what you just said, call that budget development and transparency
okay,
for right now. Like that, we'll just call it that, and then you're coming back on the 20th with a value added on this. Okay,
so at least, I mean, that's a placeholder that has the word budget, and then we can.
right.
Are you
Correct.
okay with that, Terry? Well, I mean, and then to just. Well, it gives you time to think about the best way to.
You have until tomorrow morning.
Because we only had two rocks, and we can have three.
You have three.
Well, now we have three.
Now you have three.
I said we had two, so now.
Oh, okay, yes.
We had
okay.
two, so I can add that one.
Yes, that is
be
correct,
within the
ma'am.
rules.
That's right, and be within the rules.
I'm sorry, what did you say again?
Budget development and transparency.
Deb, were you gonna say something?
What, Deb, just hold on one second. So what I'm going to do is have Dr. Gibson tomorrow email me these, all right? What he's written down, because I know y'all are writing them, but just so that we all have that same
Correct.
document, right?
Yep.
And then I will pass that on to you all to say, here's what those pieces that you all discussed, so that you can spend time between, when you receive them tomorrow until the 20th to really solidify your thoughts around those pieces. That way, then you're coming back as an individual trustee with your kind of, I've thought a lot about these issues. Here's what I think it really needs to say. Does that make sense?
I think that's perfect. I have checked everything that we talked about, we were going to talk about.
I just wanted to ask a clarification. Is this bucket called stewardship or spending?
Right
I got
now,
confused.
we're just calling it financial
Financial.
at this point. Is that right? Like just financial, and then we'll see. But all of those words were thrown around
Yeah,
in a
yeah.
rapid succession a while ago. But we'll call it financial for now. Student, staff, stakeholder, financial are the four buckets. Thank y'all for letting me be part of this, seriously. It's
Oh,
a
we're
lot of
done?
fun. Yep,
It's not 9 o'clock either.
we hit our targets for tonight.
Do you want to start the thousands of hours of conversation now, or do you want
No,
to?
no.
Only 997 hours to go.
No, thank you for being here and facilitating
Yeah,
this
that
with
was
us,
fun.
because it went really well.
Yeah, it was a great conversation. And I'm not just saying that, this was really robust. A lot of good thinking, good starting point. One beautiful thing is you already have a superintendent they're already deploying it, so we're not really worried or, thinking about that and how to get that lift going. And this helps me just work with you all to get this essence of it down. So thank you for letting me be part of it.
Yeah, no.
Thank you.
And before I just want to let you all know that next Tuesday, when cabinet meets, and then the principal meeting is that following Thursday, this will be what I'm discussing with cabinet. And so this will be in discussions as you're working through it to get them to understand, because it will take, this is I think, Dr. Gibson, you said about culture. This is a huge cultural shift that this organization is going to go through with this scorecard. So it's going to take a lot of, Miss Caldwell reminds me all the time, 7 times in 7 different ways, it's, 7 different, all of this piece. This is just going to be this constant drum, kind of like what you heard about me saying, here are my 3 priorities. It'll be, we're working on scorecard. Let me talk to you about the scorecard. You'll hear about it when I give my state of the district to PTA, when I give the state of the district to our Illyrians. We are going to create a message this week that goes out to our community that you all are starting this process. So you will hear and see a lot about this over a long time. It will constant be a drum, so the slow
Good.
drum.
Thank you, because that's what I was wondering, how we're going to start the communication. We're going to
Yes,
start
sir.
now then, so everyone knows what we're working on as a board.
That is correct,
Great.
because again, we need to let the community know you all have started this process. Just with Dr. Gibson's schedule, my original plan was to try to do the video before you did this, but Dr. Gibson's schedule is what it is, and so this was the date we could grab them. So the video is going to come out a little bit after the fact, but it's going to be, this is what's happening. We're going to be coming to you. And again, we're not going to set definitive dates because you need the time for the process to play. Once that piece culminates at, okay, we're good at here, then we'll move to the next phase. And then that will take the time it takes to feel like we've got a good whatever, then we'll move to the next phase, so forth and so on. That's why I gave you the document from me that kind of outlines it. And then it's a process, so we can massage it and amend it as we see fit, right? Mm-hmm. However it makes sense for us. Because this is a slightly different process than Dr. Gibson's seen in other districts. And
It's not rote for me.
right. And that's why when I send him those 3 pages, he's like, my goodness, you're already down that line. Like, this isn't typically where I get, because we have to back way up. So this is just, the community piece was a little unique for you that I said, it's super important. We go to the community. So this is a little bit different. He's not a cookie cutter, I guess is my point. This isn't like, come in, this is what we do, and we just move on. This is unique to us, our community, and you all, what you wish to have happen.
Yeah.
That was it.
Well, I think it was great. So thank you again. Safe travels
Yes.
tonight. So item 3, adjournment, and the time is 8:17.